Let us pray. Almighty God, we willingly acknowledge you as the supreme being, most gracious and most merciful. Look down, we beseech you, on us who are members of this Senate, and deign to assist us in the duties that we have to perform on behalf of our beloved country of Trinidad and Tobago. Open our eyes to see the truth, and help us to accept it with all its implications into our lives. Direct us, O Lord, in our deliberations, so that setting aside private interests, unwholesome prejudices, and personal affections, we may treat all matters set before us with honesty, courage, and conviction. Through all we say and do in this Senate, may we give glory and honor to your holy name, inspire confidence in our fellow citizens, and make a positive contribution to the peace and prosperity of our nation. Amen.
Oath or affirmation, announcements by the President, bills brought from the House of Representatives, appearing on the supplemental order paper, the Insurance Amendment Bill 2019 in the name of the Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Minister in the Ministry of Finance. No. Leader of Government Business.
President. Madam President, in accordance with Standing Order 62(1)B, I beg to move that the next stage of the Insurance Amendment Bill 2019 be taken on Wednesday, February 5th, 2020.
Honourable Senators, the question is that the next stage of the bill be taken on Wednesday, February the 5th, 2020. Those in favour say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. The next stage of the bill will be taken on Wednesday, February the 5th, 2020.
Petitions, papers.
Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following paper as listed on the order paper in the name of the Minister of Public Utilities. The annual audited financial statements of the Trinidad and Tobago Postal Corporation for the years ended September 30th, 2008, 2009, and 2010.
Minister of Labour and Small Enterprise Development.
Madam President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following papers listed on the order paper in my name. The ministerial response of the Ministry of Labour and Small Enterprise Development to the 13th report of the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality and Diversity on Sexual Harassment in the Workplace. Thank you, Madam President.
Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I have the honor to lay on the table the following papers as listed on the order paper and supplemental order paper in the names of the Minister of Finance, the Attorney General, the Minister of Education, Minister of Health, the Minister of State in the Office of the Prime Minister, the Minister of Community Development, Culture and the Arts, and the Minister of Public Administration. The report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the National Libraries and Information System Authority for the years ended September 30th, 2012, 2013, 2014, and 2015. The report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Office of Procurement Regulation for the year ended September 30th, 2018. The audited financial statement of the Sports Company of Trinidad and Tobago, Sport, for the financial year ended September 30th, 2019. The audited report of the Trinidad and Tobago Securities and Exchange Commission for the year ended September 30th, 2018. The ministerial response of the Ministry of Finance to the 25th report of the Public Accounts Committee on the examination of the audited financial statements of the National Lotteries Control Board for the years 2008 and 2012, and the NLCB's expenditure and internal controls during this period. The annual report of the First Citizens Investment Services Limited and its subsidiaries for the year 2019. The response of the Auditor General Department to the 12th report of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee on the examination of the audited accounts, balance sheets, and other financial statements of the National Training Agency for the financial years 2008 to 2011. The report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Police Complaints Authority for the year ended September 30th, 2017 and 2018. The ministerial response of the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs to the 14th report of the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality and Diversity on sexual harassment in the education sector. The ministerial response of the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs to the 13th report of the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality and Diversity on sexual harassment in the workplace. The ministerial response of the Ministry of Education to the 14th report of the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality and Diversity on sexual harassment in the education sector. The ministerial response of the Ministry of Health to the 13th report of the Joint Select Committee on Local Authorities, Service Commissions and Statutory Authorities, including the THA, on an inquiry into the efficiency and effectiveness of the National Emergency Ambulance Service. The Green Paper on the National Child Policy of Trinidad and Tobago. The Green Paper on the National HIV and AIDS Policy of Trinidad and Tobago 2020 to 2030. The Green Paper on the National Policy on Culture and the Arts of Trinidad and Tobago 2019 to 2024. And finally, Madam President, the response of the Service Commission Department to the 19th report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on the examination of the expenditure and internal controls of the Ministry of Works and Transport.
Reports from committees, urgent questions.
Senator Mark.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. To the Attorney General, in light of reports that members of the public are being asked to pay extra money to secure birth, death, and marriage certificates at the Registrar General's Department, what measures are being taken to eliminate this practice?
Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I can state emphatically that employees of the Registrar General's Division do not accept monies for services outside their normal purport. We serve approximately 150 applications per day, approximately 200 people per day, and the steps that are being taken, apart from the adequacy of resources, very importantly, is the launch of online payments, which we expect to have by the 2nd of March. That will eliminate 15,000 users every 3 days from the registries in Arima, San Fernando, and Port of Spain. This is something that many people have spoken about for years and none have performed. The financial instructions have been perfected. The Cabinet has underwritten that solution, and I just left the AG's office demonstrating the payment system which the members of the legal fraternity have been using for the last year. So we are ready to launch to solve this problem.
The Senate, why members of the public seen live on television complaining about these unfortunate practices at the Registrar General's office. Can the Attorney General indicate to this House whether he's aware
Senator Mark.
of such practices?
Attorney General.
Madam President, I can state with certainty that having been left a broken, splintered, unattended system by the previous government, the need to provide a solution by way of electronic payments and process flow was immediate upon this Attorney General. That solution will be in a matter of days applied so that unscrupulous practices of bribery, etc., can stop. practices which my friend is well aware of in another place.
Senator Amin.
Thank you, Madam President. A follow-up. Can the Attorney General indicate what investigation him or his office would have conducted to ascertain that there are absolutely no employees involved in this practice?
Attorney General.
Madam President, we have monitoring systems, we have cameras, we have people on the outside. We in fact have, over the course of the last year, brought people before the courts in relation to unscrupulous practices. We have discovered a significant amount of fraud in the public service in Trinidad and Tobago at the Ministry of Works and Transport, Licensing Division, Planning Division, etc. There are matters literally before the court. We'll be able to report by next week as to approximately some 200 persons who will have been dealt with before the courts in a very aggressive fashion. Never before done in this country. Very pleased to be able to report a solution with certainty, Madam Speaker. Madam President.
Next question, Senator Mark.
Minister of National Security. In light of the coronavirus outbreak and the 14 days travel restriction imposed by this country on passengers arriving from China, can the minister explain how a female student arriving from China was allowed into this country?
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, the response is a very simple one. The student who arrived or returned from China, who is a Trinidad and Tobago citizen, did so prior to the imposition of these travel restrictions being put into place, prior to the announcement by the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago. So the citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, who I'm happy to report at this stage is being monitored and is in isolation at her home and being monitored on every single day by the chief medical officer of that district, and fortunately has no signs or symptoms of any virus, returned to the country prior to the implementation of the said travel restriction.
May I?
Can the Honourable Minister indicate whether the relevant protocols were observed upon the arrival of this female student from China before entering the territory of Trinidad and Tobago?
Minister.
As had already been implemented by the Port Health Security at Piarco International Airport, this particular individual was properly screened and therefore, having passed that screening test at the airport by Port Health, was allowed to enter Trinidad and Tobago.
Next question, Senator Mark.
Energy and energy industries. In light of the government's decision to put on hold the Dragon gas deal with Venezuela, can the minister advise as to the implications this would have on future gas supplies to this country?
Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, there's a subtle difference in what was asked and what the reality is. I just want to quote from the Prime Minister's speech yesterday. Quote, "It is regrettable that we cannot move ahead with the Dragon project, which is on hold at this time due to US sanctions on Venezuela." There's a difference. We didn't unilaterally put the project on hold. It is on hold due to US sanctions. He went on to state, at a moment's notice, we are ready to move ahead with the project on the lifting of such restrictions, since virtually all the preparatory work has already been done. With regards to our gas forecast, I am pleased to announce that based on the outlook for gas production in the short to medium term, the delay in the startup of Dragon will have no adverse impact on the domestic gas supply. This production was not factored into the ministry's forecast. So given the level of investment and commitment from upstream companies, and that was dealt with extensively yesterday, gas production is expected to increase to 4 BCF per day by the year 2024, at which point in time, 2025, the Manatee project will come on stream, and that will be bringing in 270 to 400 million cubic feet per day.
Senator Mark.
Minister, Madam President, through you, whether, based on what he has said, gas supplies to the industry, particularly at point leases, would be guaranteed as a result of what the government has just identified through the Honorable Minister. Can you give this country the assurance?
Minister.
Madam President, there are two components in a gas contract. The reliability of supply, which is quantity, the other is price. Nobody sells you anything in bulk and then don't have a price attached to it. There's new developments in the gas sector, internationally, in particular shale gas in the US, that has brought down the price of gas. Trinidad's cost of production has been increasing slightly over the years. So there's a delicate balance in evaluating the gas value chain, and the NGC is in very sensitive discussions with the downstream petrochemical sector. And I must say they have done extremely well, and gas contract has been concluded with most of the downstream petrochemical sector, and there are a couple of outstanding ones which we hope to be amicably settled.
Questions on notice? Questions for oral answer?
Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, we are pleased to announce that we will be answering all questions on the order paper.
Senator Mark.
Thank you, Madam President. That will include, Madam President, question number 15.
15.
Question number 15 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, the number of missing young girls and women cases has fluctuated over the past 3 years. The Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, in dealing with the problem of missing young girls and women, has introduced the following new initiatives. 1. Training in human trafficking. Various units within the TTPS are being exposed to a training program facilitated by the Social Work Unit and the Victim and Witness Support Unit of the TTPS. The Counter-Trafficking Unit of the Ministry of National Security, Police Complaints Authority, and the Ministry of Education are also working along with them. The aim and purpose of these training programs is to bring awareness and increase sensitization to the relevant audiences. 2. Missing persons register. Immediate action is taken to investigate reports of missing persons when reported to the TTPS as compared to the previous waiting period of approximately 24 hours. 3. The Anti-Kidnapping Unit has an outreach program where police divisions with high runaway rates for girls, young girls, schools, homes, and churches are focused on when undertaking outreach programs. Several challenges may have prompted these persons to run away, and as such, remedies are forthcoming through the community police, the Victim Witness Support Unit, Police Youth Club, Social Work Unit, and in some instances, the courts. The approach is proactive. 4. Street Theatre Crime and Safety Initiative. A community policing secretariat has embarked upon this initiative, which entails safety tips and demonstrations relative to personal safety and property safety. 5. Partnering with different agencies. The Child Protection Unit continues to partner with different agencies as well as communicating with young girls and women when invited to do so, such as at schools, youth camps, churches, PTA meetings. 6. Lectures and career days and sensitization drives. 7. Advertisements and promotional videos. Notwithstanding the introduction of these new initiatives, the TTPS will continue utilizing following existing initiatives: social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, improving the TTPS's response to violence within intimate relationships and families, written parental or guardian consent to publish the photos of missing minor girls when required. Missing female investigations are conducted by women police officers as far as possible. School intervention initiatives, community outreach programs, outreach to adolescent and young adults through the police youth clubs, visiting battered women shelters and homes, thus creating a greater collaboration between agencies towards developing other safety initiatives.
Mark?
Can I ask the Honorable Minister, with all these initiatives outlined by the Honorable Minister, could he tell us, Honorable House, whether there has been a reduction in the number of missing girls and women under his stewardship? Can he advise us, Honorable House?
Minister.
Madam President, what you've actually seen is that we're not burying our heads in the sand. So how people have become more aware of missing girls is one of the initiatives we've implemented. We no longer wait for 24 hours. From the time family members and relatives report missing girls and young women, immediately the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service put out releases to the public with the photographs, etc., asking for information. Nearly all of these matters, it has resulted in the detection of the young girls, them turning up, them contacting the police service or their families, and they have run away from home. So there is no increased phenomenon. What you have now is an increased openness about the issue, and we're dealing with it directly, not only through the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, but through other initiatives and programs and departments in the Ministry of National Security and also social development and
Senator Mark.
education.
Can the Honorable Minister provide this House, this Senate, with data as it relates to the number of missing girls and women over the last 3 years? Can you provide us with any data at all on that so we can compare how many went missing, how many have been returned, so we can see what is taking place with these initiatives? Can you assist us in that area?
Senator Mark, I won't allow that question based on the question that had been posed.
Madam President, how can the Minister indicate how many training programs have been conducted? He spoke about training programs over the past 3 years, Madam President, in order to address this question of missing girls.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, we've also taken the step of setting up an interministerial committee that meets the Minister of Labour, the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, the Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister in charge of gender and youth, as well as myself, and social development. Sit on that committee and meet with all of the technocrats from immigration, the child protection unit, the counter-trafficking unit, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and they have provided us with the data showing that within the last 12 months, I believe, there have been a number of these training programs, not only across the public service, but also in schools and churches, etc. The exact amount and who were provided with training can be provided when the appropriate question is asked.
Senator Mark.
The Honourable Minister, whether there is a link between our missing girls and women and the exportation of sale to foreign lands? Is there any link or connection that the Ministry of National Security has seen as it relates to missing girls and women being exported to foreign lands? Can you give us any guidance on that matter, Honourable President?
Senator Mark, that question does not arise from the question that had been posed and the answers that have been given. Next question, Senator Mark.
Question number 28 to the Minister of Energy and Energy Industry.
Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, the supply contracts referred to in the question were negotiated by a cross-functional team made up of the relevant subject matter experts from the national gas companies, commercial, legal, operations, and financial divisions, ably led by the President of NGC in conjunction with the Board of Directors of the NGC, and supported by discussions from time to time with the Government of Trinidad and Tobago.
Indicate as it relates to the question of the gas price, can the minister indicate whether the government led by the Prime Minister, the then Minister of Communication, were directly involved in negotiations with EOG, BPTT, and Shell without experts from the NGC? Can you provide any guidance to this Honorable Senate as to whether NGC experts were involved at that material time when those prices were negotiated?
Minister.
Madam President, the substantive portion of my answer indicated that the contracts were negotiated by a cross-functional team made up of the relevant subject matter experts. And this is the umpteenth time, if that's a word, that the opposition is trying to link the Prime Minister and the now Minister of National Security to these gas price negotiations. The Prime Minister and the Minister of National Security has gone on record many, many times indicating that all they did in Houston, when the actual negotiations broke down, where we were too far apart in terms of the price and the volumes, to ask the leaders at the highest level of the energy companies to come back to the table and negotiate in good faith with the NGC. And I'll say it one more time, that is exactly what happened. And today we have secured gas supply and gas price contracts with the upstreamers in Trinidad and Tobago.
Senator Mark.
Can the minister indicate when and where did these negotiations take place with these experts and cross-functionary teams? Could you tell this Honorable Senate when and where these negotiations took place, please?
Senator Mark, that question doesn't arise based on the question initially posed.
Madam President, may I ask through you that, through to the Honorable Minister of Energy, is the minister aware that there is Hansard records to show that the Prime Minister of this country indicated that he, the Honorable Prime Minister, was intimately involved in those negotiations that resulted in the final gas price that we are now paying, NGC is now charging downstreamers in the industry? Is the minister aware of such records available?
Senator Mark, I will not allow that question. Any further question on this matter?
Can the Honorable Minister identify, Madam President, the names of the individual experts that he mentioned who were involved in those negotiations that led to the final gas price formula that we are now experiencing through negotiation between NGC and downstreamers?
Minister.
Madam President, the NGC is a serious commercial entity involved in sophisticated gas negotiations upstream, midstream, downstream, and with international players. I think I have tried my best to indicate that the relevant subject matter experts from the NGC in commercial, legal, operation, finance partook in the negotiations. I think it would be inappropriate to call them by name because the team changed through time. This negotiation didn't happen one day, you know. It took several meetings and several engagement, exchange of documents. Some meetings were actually held in Trinidad, some meetings were held at the NGC office, some meetings were held at the BPTT office, some meetings were remotely done. And this is how negotiation takes place in the modern world. And I must say that the opposition continues to try to put some stigma as to these gas price negotiations, and I want to go on record to say that these negotiations were above board.
Next question, Senator Mark.
Do I have any final question?
No, Senator Mark, you used up your question. Next one, please.
Question number 29 to the Minister of Finance.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam President. Cabinet's approval was sought and obtained in September 2019 for the Tobago House of Assembly to issue a bond on the domestic market in the amount of $300 million for capital works. In addition, the Ministry of Finance intends to work closely with the THA in executing this bond with a focus on reviewing the documentation and ensuring that the terms and conditions agreed upon are in accordance with the wider public sector debt portfolio. Furthermore, the THA has established a prudential borrowing limit restricting financing repayments to 5% of recurrent expenditure for the fiscal year. The Ministry of Finance will seek to ensure that the funds are utilized for agreed projects, in particular development projects that are of greatest benefit to residents of Tobago and the wider public. The Ministry of Finance will also monitor the administration of the bond once issued to ensure that all debt service payments are made on time and as agreed.
Madam President, can the Minister indicate whether the government of Trinidad and Tobago will be guaranteeing these loans that the THA would be able to access on the local market?
Minister.
No. Can the Minister indicate how those loans that are going to be accessed by the THA will be repaid?
Senator Mark, that question doesn't arise.
Madam President, can the Minister indicate to this House whether there is a limit available to the THA for accessing loans on the domestic capital market? Is there a limitation, Madam President?
Minister.
Madam President, with respect to the first supplemental which you ruled out of order, I made it clear this was going to be paid from recurrent funds, and I also made it clear in my response that the THA has established a prudential borrowing limit restricting financing repayments to 5% of recurrent expenditure for the fiscal year. That was already asked and answered.
Is the Minister satisfied that in the absence of any audited financial accounts since 2007 by the THA, that he is confident that the THA has the ability to really engage in this kind of exercise and the kind of confidence that the Minister is exercising through the THA to allow them to borrow monies on the open market, given this track record, Madam President?
Minister.
Firstly, Madam President, I do not think that statement about audited financial accounts is correct. I believe it's grossly inaccurate. And yes, we have confidence in them.
Next question, Senator Mark.
Thank you, Madam President. Question number 31 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Very much, Madam President. Madam President, according to information received from the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the measures put in place to give effect to the decision of the High Court on matters relating to disciplinary action against rogue police officers includes the following. 1. Protocols were established to increase the capturing and recording of breaches of discipline by police officers from social, print, and electronic media. 2. Additional First Division disciplinary officers were assigned to the Complaints Division to effectively manage indiscipline in Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. 3. In May 2019, the staffing at the Complaints Division was increased to 11 officers to effectively conduct breach of discipline investigations. 4. Systems were introduced for the proper management of the tribunal officers in order to increase the delivery of judgment in regard to tribunal matters.
Senator Mark.
This Honourable House, what systems were introduced to deal with the management of tribunal decisions as he has outlined.
Minister.
Madam President, the police service would be in charge of its own procedures and processes, which I'm sure would adhere to proper practice, proper procedure, natural justice. The police service have assured the public through me that they have now put in place a management system to deal with the delivery of judgments in the tribunal matters. That's internal to the police affairs.
Senator Hussain.
Thank you very much. To the Minister of National Security. Minister, based on the measures that you would have outlined earlier on to the answer to the question, can you indicate whether or not those measures are in line with the recommendations of the Police Manpower Audit Report?
Minister.
I assume that the Senator is referring to the Professor Diusaran report that was asked for and obtained by this administration. The answer is yes. That report is being utilized by the administrative arm of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and they have been implementing a lot of the recommendations stemming from that report, and I'm sure including this one.
Senator Mark.
In light of judgments from the High Court in which the judges are saying that police officers who have committed grave breaches of natural justice in their activities ought to be charged directly for their misdemeanors. Can the minister indicate whether any attempts are being made by the government to look at the possible implementation of such action by the administration?
Minister.
Madam President, the whole answer has been towards that regard. First of all, just to correct the misinformation, I don't think there's any decision from the court with respect to a breach of natural justice. It would have been a breach of proper procedures, a breach of persons' rights, and these types of things, which I stress is not a new phenomenon. This is something that unfortunately has been going on with the police service for far too long, and I am happy and I stand with the police service today that finally they are taking the appropriate directions and actions to stem this and to deal with it. And what I can say, this administration has told the Commissioner of Police at the level of the National Security Council that he must root out the rogue police officers in the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and the government will stand behind him whilst he does so, and we will fight those matters in court as we have been doing.
Next question, Senator Obika.
Thank you, Madam President. Question number 62 to the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, further to the cessation of Petrotrin's operations, an asset preservation and security program was put in place to ensure the ongoing security and maintenance of all physical assets, inclusive of the Augustus Long Hospital and medical centers and associated medical equipment. No adverse issues have been noted to date with regards to either the security or maintenance of the hospital, medical centers, and/or medical equipment.
Senator Obika.
Thank you, Madam President. Can the Minister indicate, especially for the interest of people from Point Fortin and Marabella, Pinal, and so on, if they'll be reopening these health centers, the 7 to 9 health centers and the hospital that was under the purview of Petrotrin?
Minister.
Madam President, no final decision has been taken on that yet, but I just want to remind the Honorable Senator that when the restructuring of Petrotrin took place, the medical policy of the company was retooled into a medical insurance, which has been now handled by, I think, is Maritime, for a 2-year period. After this 2 years has elapsed, we'll take a final decision as to how we proceed with this whole issue of medical. But as we speak, the facility, the hospital, and the medical centers are secured, and all equipment are being properly maintained as we speak. The drugs, however, Madam President, the drugs were distributed to the relevant regional health authorities in the specific jurisdiction.
Senator Obika.
Madam President, thank you. Can the Honourable Minister indicate what of the medical personnel that were employed in these health centers? Where are they deployed? Where are they deployed to as we speak?
Minister.
I wouldn't be able to answer that question. They got their termination benefits like all the other employees, and I guess they are now on the open market seeking employment until such time we take a final decision as to what would happen with the medical centers.
Senator Obika.
Therefore, given the fullness of the Honourable Minister's submission, can the Minister indicate if there are any plans to reopen the centers because there is much hardship being meted out to the persons, the former Petrotrin workers in Point 14, for example, and Marabella specifically?
Minister.
Madam President, if you had asked about any other part of Trinidad and Tobago, I might have facilitated that question. The people of Point 14 will be getting a $1.3 billion spanking new hospital with 100 beds. That's public expenditure. And if that doesn't meet the needs of the citizens and the residents of Point 14, they are all very, very, very happy with that, I must say.
Senator Obika.
Therefore, Madam President, can the Honourable Minister indicate when would the hospital in Point 14 be fully operational, given his response?
Minister.
Send that question to the Minister of Health.
Next question, Senator Obika.
Madam President, question number 63 to the Minister of Finance.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam President. In establishing the rate for VAT refund bonds, the Ministry of Finance considered existing yields on Treasury bills and other short-term government financing, which were then adjusted to take into account the affordability of the debt service given the prevailing macroeconomic environment.
Senator Obika.
And, notwithstanding the Honourable Minister's statement, can he indicate what would be what is the terms and conditions of loan, the duration, for instance?
Minister.
Madam President, the Honourable Senator didn't ask that. He should have asked that in the question. He asked about the interest rate. If you wish to know about the terms and conditions, please pose the question in the proper manner.
Senator Obika.
President, can the Honourable Minister indicate whether or not they are in fact riding the balance sheets of businesses because the yield curve does not have a 1.5% unless it's a one-year bond? Can the Honourable Minister indicate if the government is in fact riding the balance sheet of the business sector in the VAT returns issue with the 1.5% yield?
Senator Obika, I won't allow that question. Any other questions, Senator Obika?
Can the Honourable Minister indicate, because the Honourable Minister in the first response
Question,
said that,
please, Senator Obika.
Right,
A
so
question.
given the first response of the Honourable Minister, can he indicate if that 1.5% rate is fair given the duration of the bond?
Minister.
Madam President, I made it crystal clear that this question refers to the interest rate. And if the Honourable Senator wishes to know what the other terms and conditions of the bonds are, he should pose the question in the proper manner. I'm pleased to say, however, that the bonds are targeted to be issued by the end of this month, at which time all of these issues will be addressed.
Sir.
Thank you, Madam President. Question number 64 to the Minister of Planning and Development.
Minister of Labour.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I rise to respond to this question on behalf of my colleague, the Minister in the Ministry of Planning and Development, who is caught up in traffic on her way here to answer this question. Employment and labor force statistics relating to the third quarter of 2019 are currently unavailable, but are anticipated to be available in the second quarter of 2020, that is April to June 2020. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator Obika.
Can the Honourable Minister indicate what are the reasons for the inaccessibility or the unavailability of unemployment data for third quarter 2019 when we're already in 2020, Madam President?
Minister.
Madam President, I am not in a position to assist the Honorable Senator, but I undertake to obtain the necessary information, and it will be conveyed to this House.
Senator Beaker.
I would like to ask a question in the public interest. Persons asking if the government is in fact hiding unemployment data. Can the Honourable Minister put pay to that, that query by members of the public?
Senator Beaker, that question is not allowed. Any further questions?
Request for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on definite matters of urgent public importance.
Senator Mark.
Madam President, in accordance with Standing Order 16.2, I hereby seek your leave to move the adjournment of the Senate for the purpose of discussing a definite matter of urgent public importance, namely the failure of the government to adequately secure the borders of Trinidad and Tobago in the wake of the coronavirus global health emergency. The matter is definite as it pertains specifically to a global health emergency which currently has over 20,000 cases and claimed over 400 lives globally. The matter is urgent because the virus has quickly spread to 25 countries, and there is a high probability that the virus can make its way to our shores, given that the incubation period is up to 14 days to be detected. The matter is of public importance because it is the government's duty to protect the lives and livelihood of its citizens, and therefore the government must implement urgent contingency measures to address this highly contagious coronavirus. I thank you for your consideration of this critically important matter.
Honourable Senators, I have considered the motion as presented, and I'm not satisfied that it qualifies under this standing order.
Statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries, personal explanations, introduction of bills, appearing on the supplemental order paper, the interception of Communications Amendment Bill 2020 in the name of the Attorney General, public business, government business, motions.
Senator Hussain.
Madam President, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas it is the government's responsibility to ensure public safety and security of the citizenry, and whereas thousands of citizens and businesses have been negatively affected by the high levels of crime in Trinidad and Tobago, be it resolved that this Senate condemn the government for its failure to effectively deal with the unacceptable and serious crime situation affecting law-abiding citizens. Madam President, thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity to rise, as this is the first private motion that I am piloting in the Senate in this Parliament. And Madam President, let me say that it brings me no pleasure to have filed a motion such as this in this chamber for discussion today. Ideally, Madam President, every one of us in this chamber would have hoped that the crime situation that is plaguing our country and our citizens is not here, so that our people can feel safe. But it goes without saying that there's a sense of hopelessness, a sense of despair amongst the citizenry. We on this side, Madam President, acknowledge that crime is a social issue, but in the same breath, we also note that the government has a paramount duty and a responsibility to address crime. It was Thomas Hobbes, Madam President, who said, in the oldest and simplest justification for government, it is a protector, protecting citizens from violence. But this government has shamelessly announced that they are not responsible for crime. The government has abdicated its responsibility as fear and insecurity has engulfed our republic. Today, as I move this motion, Madam President, I do so for the persons whom they have failed to protect. I do so as a voice for the voiceless. I speak on behalf of the victims of crime, the families of the thousands of citizens who have been brutally murdered, the family of young Videsh Subar, Nai Singh, Raymond Chukong, Keon and Clevon Gill, on behalf of the son and husband of 36-year-old Candy McIntyre, who was gunned down after her son's graduation, on behalf of the families of the Orange Valley fishermen, for whom the government is still awaiting an invitation to visit the grieving families, on behalf of the families and the thousands of citizens whose lives have been snuffed out by the criminal elements under the watch of this PNM regime. Madam President, imagine in 2020, the month of January, with 31 days, there have already been 46 murders. More murders than days in this country. Since this PNM government assumed office, in the unrelenting 1,634 days that they have been in office, there has been a harrowing 2,198 bloody murders, 2,198 Trinbagonian citizens who have been brutally murdered and ripped away from the lives of their families and their loved ones. And the sad reality that we all face in this country is by the time that I am finished piloting this motion, the murder toll, in fact, will go up. Madam President, that is what our country has come to today. Today is not a day for Pekong. Trinidad and Tobago is awash with the tears of mothers and fathers and children who have lost their loved ones. Today is not a day for taking bait from the other side. Today is the beginning of the change needed to solve the problems of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam President, today I will tell you what the government said that they would have done and what they didn't do, what they did and what they failed to do. And when we return, I will tell you what we will do, Madam President. Her Excellency President Paula May Weeks told us that the people of Trinidad and Tobago are hurting. Madam President, this government has had enough time. They have had enough time. But what did they do? They are in their final months of their 5-year term, a time when citizens should feel a level of comfort that the government has worked for you. But the reality is that everywhere you turn, you see people being robbed, beaten, hijacked, raped, assaulted, abused, murdered, and in every possible terrifying situation you can think of. At this point, I am certain that every single citizen of Trinidad and Tobago has either been a victim of crime or they knew someone who was a victim of crime. That is where we are. That is where they have brought us. Crime is not a situation that has occurred overnight. But indeed, Madam President, the statistics would show for the last 5 years that crime has worsened. The data will show that every time a PNM government is in power, crime is out of control. In 2015, Madam President, you would recall some of those who are sitting on the government benches now campaigned heavily on the issue of crime. They sold dreams to the population. They wooed the people of this country with tales of, we read and ready and let's do this. But what have they done? They have asked the people of this country for a chance for 5 years in office and peddled their narrative that they have every solution under the sun to fix Trinidad and Tobago. Today, I can say with conviction that they have done nothing, Madam President. Their manifesto promises, which they use as a policy for government, is nothing more than cheap talk printed on wasted paper. In their manifesto, the first sector that they addressed was that of national security. Of their promises, they indicated that they would have appointed a commissioner of police and 3 deputies. They took 3 years, Madam President, to appoint a commissioner of police. And to this day, in their final year of government, they have not appointed the deputy commissioners of police. You have one man, the commissioner of police, doing the job of 4 men in the police service. Is that how you expect to deal with the crime situation in Trinidad and Tobago? They said that they would reform, upgrade, and modernize the TTPS. Well, how exactly did that work out? Because every one of us knew last year that the Commissioner of Police was on television having to call out the Minister of Finance publicly and embarrassingly, cap in hand, that he has no money to run the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. No money. Is that their vision for modernizing and transforming the police service in this country, Madam President? Absolute failure. Then they went on to promise a new approach to fighting crime through community safety partnerships. But what did they do? They, in fact, dismantled the community comfort patrols which had begun under the last government. There was police on the ground, there was boots on the ground, there was increased visibility of police officers that deterred criminals from committing criminal acts on innocent people of this country. They promised to establish crime prevention through environmental design. Well, as a student of criminology, Madam President, what does that mean? That means you use your environmental factors that are available to you so that you will install mechanisms, physical mechanisms, so that you will deter persons from committing crime. And one of the most important elements of this is that of CCTV cameras. And everyone knows how important CCTV cameras are with respect to crime in terms of detection. It has now become an essential in probably every person's household. Persons stop planting flowers, but they're putting up CCTV cameras in their homes. And yet this Minister of National Security, Madam President, failed to negotiate a contract for the provision of CCTV cameras that has expired since when? June 2017, Madam President. That is unacceptable. That is a total failure on the part of this government, Madam President. They have promised a police management agency. After 4 years, they did not deliver. What about the Joint Border Agency? You did not deliver. What about the Police Service Inspectorate? You did not deliver, Madam President. You did not deliver. Their manifesto spoke about tackling crime, youth criminality, in hope of pulling young people away from a life of crime, getting the youths off the streets, putting them into programs to rehabilitate them into upstanding citizens in society. But you know what has been the result of that, Madam President? Today, we have the highest number of youth offenders in Trinidad and Tobago. Again, they have failed on their promise. They also went to say that they would partner with the judiciary. Partner with the judiciary. You know what they have done, Madam President, to the judiciary? They have reduced the judiciary to judges complaining in this country that they don't have paper to print judgments on. The Princestown Magistrate Court, Madam President, since a major earthquake, it is now housed in the Rio Claro Magistrate Court. So when that woman who's been abused by her husband has to go to court and apply for that protection order, she who lives in Princestown has to travel all the way to Rio Claro every month to get an adjournment for her matter to be heard. And when the mother who has about 4 or 5 children have to go to the court and get $100 maintenance, she has to pay $40 in passage to reach there, Madam President. That is the suffering of the poor people in this country. They have treated the judiciary with disdain and contempt. They have failed on their promise, Madam President. They have failed. And I hope that the population is paying careful attention, because in a few months, they will shamelessly come with their next production, a manifesto of mamagai and deception, while trying to secure votes for them to finish a job, to further destroy whatever little is left of our country. Then, after the manifesto, they came with a PNM 10-point crime plan. 10 points. Madam President, I want to give them 0. I want to give them 0. Their first one was the appointment of Commissioner of Police. I dealt with that already. They spoke of the police manpower audit. Well, I heard the minister said that some of the recommendations are being employed, Madam President, and I hope that that is so, and that is not in fact just talk, because we are accustomed to talk from this government. Then you hear that they say that they are going to expand the municipal police force in each municipality to 100 officers. Well, Madam President, today I can tell you that is not true. In the Chaguanas Borough Corporation, there are 31 officers. And in the Princestown Regional Corporation, there are only 30, nowhere near 100. Again, broken promises by this government. In their fourth point, they spoke of the necessary legislation to give greater powers to the Police Complaints Authority to deal with the rogue police officers. Where has that gone? Where is that legislation? We come to this parliament and pass FATCA bill after FATCA bill after FATCA bill and FATF recommendations after FATF, but we are not dealing with our domestic situation right here in Trinidad and Tobago. The Police Complaints Authority report for 2018 stated that there were 725 reports that were made against police officers for the period October 1st, 2017 to September 2018. Complaints ranging from assault, larceny, fraud, and corruption. And yet, the legislation is not here to strengthen the Police Complaints Authority. Madam President, they promised a joint select committee of Parliament on crime suppression and security. Well, to date, we have never seen that joint select committee. There was a meeting when the leader of the opposition and the Prime Minister met in a bipartisan approach in order to get solutions for the crime problem. And the government promised that they would have removed the chairmanship of the Joint Select Committee on National Security and replaced it with an independent senator. Today, Madam President, they have reneged on that promise. Again, broken promises, PNM style. They spoke on their number 6 point, Madam President, of witness tampering, creating witness tampering offenses. You want to create offenses for witness tampering, but what about witness protection? How many state witnesses have been gunned down or executed within recent times? What is the sense in pursuing witness tampering but not prioritizing witness protection? There are people who are risking their lives to ensure that the state has a case in court, to ensure justice is served, and that is how you treat them? Absolutely no regard for the safety of state witnesses. They told the population of their plan to create a specific offense of unlawful eviction. But, Madam President, people don't have homes in this country to live in. The 8-point plan was that of an urban renewal plan for East Port of Spain. I don't know if the Belgrave Properties Limited on Picton Street is an integral part of that urban renewal plan. Point 9, they spoke of the now infamous anti-gang legislation. And those on that side use that as the greatest excuse for the crime scourge and everything else that is wrong in the country. We were promised to see a reduction in crime from the passage of that legislation. It was passed, and today most of the murders are classified as what? Gang-related. The minister must answer how many persons have been convicted under this legislation. The country will be very interested in hearing about how many convictions under this particular legislation. Then the last point in their 10-point crime plan was adopting the Caribbean Court of Justice, the CCJ, as our final court of appeal. In 2012, Madam President, when then Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar brought that legislation to the Parliament, it was this very same PNM opposition, now government, who voted against that bill. So for them to now come and say that, that is hypocrisy personified. We have seen what they would do and how they had failed, and miserably so. After 4 ministers of national security and a prime minister who heads the National Security Council, crime has been flourishing in this country. Madam President, it seems that they read the job description wrong and have done opposite of what was expected of them. Of what they said they were prepared to do, it is the worst case of gross incompetence this country has seen to date. Madam President, they have had enough time, they did nothing, and now it is too late. Time has run out on the PNM. I have outlined the promises of this PNM government, Madam President, which they have used in their campaign trail. They have used it so that people can give them a chance, but they betrayed the trust of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. They have failed miserably when it comes to national security, and the population is feeling the pain. The people of Trinidad and Tobago continue to live in fear with no comfort given to them by this government. I just want to compare the statistics, Madam President, for the years 2011 to 2019. And I chose these years because I want to give a full picture of a full year in terms of the governments, comparison with the governments. So I'm using 2011 as the first year. And in 2011, under UNC government, there was 354 murders. Too many still, Madam President. But on the corresponding year of 2016, there were 463 murders, a net increase of 109 murders. In 2012, 385 murders. Corresponding year for the PNM 2017, 494, another net increase of 109 murders. 2013, 408 murders. 2018 corresponding period, 516 murders and net increase of 108 murders. 2014, number of murders, 403. Corresponding period, 2019, 538, a net increase of 135 murders. And yet, this government is in denial that we are in a crime crisis. Madam President, some of us will argue that our natural gas and oil is our greatest assets, but I will disagree because our greatest and most precious assets are our people. It is the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And every single day that someone is murdered, we lose one of us. We lose a fellow Trinbagonian. This out-of-control crime situation has certainly robbed us of our people and our talent. Our streets are covered in blood and eyes are flowing with tears while we have a government who seems to be numb to the pain and suffering of the people. Our country is being destroyed by this epidemic. Today, wives have become widowed and children have become orphans. But we have become a society that is so numb and so desensitized to murders that when someone is killed, that person is regarded as a statistic, as another one. That is where we are today. Madam President, crime also affects the business community, the business sector. There's currently a crisis of confidence in the business sector. The crime tsunami has certainly hit the business sector, which is trying to stay afloat from its deleterious effects. Businessmen and businesswomen have become the primary targets for criminals of opportunity. They are robbed, they are beaten and kidnapped by criminals on a daily basis. And if you turn on your television at 6 p.m. on Mondays to Fridays, you will see the CCTV camera footage of what innocent, law-abiding citizens of this country who try to earn an honest living have to face. The business sector has certainly taken a heavy blow from this crime situation. There is now a crisis of confidence in the business sector. On the 20th of January 2020, the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Industry and Commerce issued a media statement titled, "We are in a crisis of crime." And I quote from that media release. It says that the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Industry and Commerce is of the opinion that the Minister of National Security, in his leadership role, must acknowledge that we are just not in a difficult situation, but in fact in a crisis regarding crime, and we do not have the luxury of time to deal with it. Those are not my words. Those are the words of the business sector of Trinidad and Tobago. So while the government and the minister continues to play political games, the businessmen of this country are calling on them to wake up and accept the reality of the day that we are in a crime crisis. Get to work now. Businesses that have been targeted by criminals and those who make it out alive have closed their doors and migrated. Many are saying that they are taking not a second chance for those who have escaped alive. And while our businessmen, Madam President, they are migrating from Trinidad and Tobago, you have foreign investors being fearful to set up business here. When you examine the foreign direct investment figures, you will see the sharp decline. At a time between 2010 to 2015, where the country recorded the highest ever foreign direct investment, totaling $10.38 billion, this government, through its failed policies, reduced FDI to negative as investors took their funds out of Trinidad and Tobago. They have created no environment to attract businesses to our shores. The only industry in this country that is expanding and profitable are the funeral homes. Madam President, we have seen a rapid and frightening increase in the levels of domestic and gender-based violence in this country. The government has offered no solution or comfort to those victims. The Prime Minister's only solution to their problem is for them to choose their partners wisely. When you look, Madam President, at tourism, you will see in the year 2015 that there were 38,624 visitors to Trinidad and Tobago. In the year 2018, it dropped to 33,873 tourist arrivals in Trinidad and Tobago. Persons do not desire to come to our country anymore. Madam President, you have travel advisories being issued by the United States of America, Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom. And when advisories are issued against our country, persons become fearful to travel here. It is a sad state of affairs. We all remember the harmony Trinidad and Tobago once was. And when these travel advisories are issued, instead of the Prime Minister dealing with it, all he does is blame and complain. Madam President, when visitors come to our shore, they are not immune from crime. In Carnival 2016, we will remember the death of Japanese pan player Asami Nagakiya, whose body was found on Ash Wednesday at the Queen's Park Savannah. She was gruesomely murdered in this country, Madam President. It is something that we should never be proud of. In December 2018, a 72-year-old victim and her 74-year-old husband, both UK citizens, were robbed and assaulted on Boxing Day. In Tobago, another Canadian couple were robbed and assaulted in Black Rock, 63-year-old and 65-year-old. They were enjoying the beach, Madam President, and they were robbed. These are what people face in our country. Today, this morning, I was sent an article on my phone, an online article dated the 2nd of February 2020 from a webpage called The Travel. And it listed Trinidad and Tobago as one of the Caribbean's least safest destinations. This is what this PNM government has reduced our beautiful country to, Madam President. It is unacceptable, totally unacceptable. Madam President, when you look at what is happening to our young people in this country, parents are no longer sending their children out into the playgrounds, into the community centers, into the play parks, because you never know whether or not you send your children out, whether they will return alive. We have seen so many instances and examples of that happening in this country. Madam President, there are 3 institutions which are responsible for dealing with crime in this country. And I want to give the current state of affairs of those institutions. And I'll deal with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service first. After this government has spent over $30 billion on national security, it is not ashamed of the conditions that they have allowed our security apparatus to fall in. Madam President, in an article dated the 20th of September, a Newsday article by Ryan Hamilton Davey, it said that the Police Social and Welfare Association, and I quote, were complaining because Miscellaneous items like toilet paper, paper towels, light bulbs are not supplied. Even fittings to repair broken toilets and faucets are not provided. Officers have to provide money to buy these items because they work in the environments. They are now bordering on OSHA issues and health and safety issues, end quote. Madam President, reporters were also told that several police stations had inadequate air conditioning or none at all, and even sewer problems. You had the Morva police station with a pigeon infestation and the effects of pigeon droppings. There's need for roof repair in Morva, and there's faulty sewer systems there. And that houses the Guard and Emergency Branch, which houses the Interagency Task Force and Traffic Branch, Madam President. That is what they have reduced the servicemen of this country to, the policemen who protect and serve us on a daily basis. And this is the same government that promised tablets and drones, body cameras and polygraph equipment, but cannot provide air-conditioned toilet paper to our servicemen in this country. That is shameless, Madam President, totally shameless. Let us look at what happens in the prison system. The prison system is a reflection of the performance of the Minister of National Security. There's a very serious problem of overcrowding at the prison. This had led to the state paying millions of dollars in compensation to prisoners. And that money could have been used in the prison itself to improve the conditions of the prisoners. There's a World Prison Brief report, Madam President, and it said that Trinidad and Tobago had 292 prisoners per 100,000 citizens. We had ranked 37th in the world amongst 222 countries and dependencies. You have countries, Madam President, with fewer prisoners per 100,000, like where? Dominica, Martinique, Singapore, Venezuela, Jamaica, Norway, and India. Fewer persons in the prison system than right here in Trinidad and Tobago. The prison system, Madam President, has become very sensitive and a very volatile area. It has been a breeding ground for gangs in this country. Imagine after $6 billion is being spent every year on national security, we cannot update the jammers in that prison. Ever so often you will see high-definition videos coming out of the prison. High-definition videos, it meant that these persons must have cellular phones and high-speed data, Madam President, for these things to come out of the prison service. And what has been done? Absolutely nothing has been done by this government. Even the prison officers in this country who risk their lives on a daily basis, they are the main targets for criminals, especially in the underworld. They were being gunned down, Madam President, on the streets and in their homes, and the government failed to take any urgent steps. I remember how many motions we brought on this side to ask the government to deal with the situation as it regards to the safety of prison officers. But I know the Minister of National Security, when he stands up to speak, will boast that they gave 250 firearms to the prison service, but there are 3,000 prison officers. What happened to the other 2,750 officers? He would boast that they will give 250 stab vests. Madam President, I am told that it is only 180 stab vests were given to the prison officers. Let us look at what is happening in the judiciary. The wheels of justice in this country are turning slow, and some argue that it is at a grinding halt. The judiciary has been in a state which we cannot be proud of. There are matters before the court that are ancient, and in some instances it takes a person to get a trial 8 to 10 years in this country. And you have a system where firearms is the number one choice of weapons, but you have a forensic science center that takes years to give a ballistic report. Madam President, they have presided over the deterioration of 3 essential institutions of national security: the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the courts, and the prison. But we must look also at what are the causes of crime. The first one I will address is joblessness in this country. Joblessness, Madam President. Under a Kamla Persad-Bissessar-led government, people were employed. That government was able to generate 55,000 new jobs without a single new tax in 5 years. It was the largest numbers of jobs created in our history. But under this present regime, they have created the ideal environment for crime to flourish. When you take away a man's job, and opportunity, he is left with no choice in this country, Madam President. Under this government, over 63,000 persons have lost their jobs. They have pauperized this nation. Many persons are not lucky to be in receipts of large rental contracts to maintain their family, but some have to turn to crime to feed their family in this country, Madam President. They have boasted about how many food cards they have cut, leaving bellies empty. Last year, they cut the food card program by $32 million, and they smile and grin about it, Madam President. Boasting that they have cut $32 million from the food card program. Mothers and fathers are put under strain because of the cost of living, the increased cost of living of this government, by the additional taxes, the increase in gas price, stagnation of salaries. People in this country are struggling, Madam President. They are struggling. They have cut opportunities for young people. GATE, they have cut MILAT allocations by 4 million, civilian conservation corps by 13 million. They cut the mentoring program for youths at risk, Madam President. They have done nothing to engage youth in arts, culture, social services, entertainment, youth in challenging circumstances, education, employment, and entrepreneurship. Madam President, they have failed our young people. They have failed to invest in their future. You are setting up Trinidad and Tobago for failure. It is too late, Madam President. It is too late for this government. What has been their response to this crisis? 4 years too late, the minister now wants to hear from the population. What are the ideas and the solutions? You are too late, Minister. The persons who sit in cabinet has the responsibility for national security. The Minister of National Security, you know what he does to the crime crisis? Throws his hand up in the air and says, I am not responsible for crime. Well, Madam President, through you, if the minister is not responsible for crime, then who is responsible for crime in this country? Every month you collect a salary, persons are paying you to ensure that they are protected and they are kept safe. But you are doing every other thing than dealing with the Ministry of National Security. And if the Minister of National Security is unaware of his role, Madam President, I want to inform him that he is not a policeman. He does not have the power to investigate, charge, and lock up persons. That is for the police to do, not for the Minister of National Security to do. And what has been the Prime Minister's response, the head of the National Security Council? Goes on TV and tells the population, do not judge me on my performance. So then what do we judge you on? It was the same Prime Minister when he was in opposition. He said, if the government cannot deal with crime, then the government is part of the problem. So, Madam President, by his own words, this government is part of the problem of crime. Part of the problem is when gang leaders benefit from million-dollar state contracts in PNM-controlled regional corporations in this country. That is where the problem stands. The level of desperation and gimmickry on display by this government is concerning. They will go to every end to discredit their political opponents, but not deal with the solution, deal with the problem. They have become so blinded by the political witch hunt that they have abdicated their primary responsibility to protect the citizenry. But when we were faced with a similar problem, Madam President, in government, we didn't throw our hands up in the air. We didn't complain. We didn't blame anyone. The achievements of the last government, Madam President, was that there were the introduction of new units, the formal establishment of the NOC, the National Operations Center, as a backbone to gather intelligence and information sharing amongst law enforcement agencies. What they have done, dismantle it, put it under the SSA, and water down the entire center, Madam President. We had units for rapid response, counter human trafficking, national security training. We improved visibility and response of law enforcement agencies, Madam President. There was interagency joint patrols, collaboration with international agencies, improved communication system, Madam President, training of police officers and other members of the protective services, increase the number of CCTV cameras, invest in youth programs where over 8,916 persons have benefited, Madam President. We have increased the fleets of the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the Fire Service, completed 9 police stations throughout Trinidad and Tobago. That is the track record of a previous government. And if we are elected again, Madam President, and when we are elected, in fact, we will do the same, and we will do more for the people of Trinidad and Tobago to keep them protected and to keep them safe from the criminal elements of this country. And while we criticize the government, we must look forward. We must look at what other jurisdictions are doing to deal with the situation. Just don't stand up there and blame the opposition. That is not going to get you anywhere. That is not going to save the life of the next person who will be murdered. Get the work done. Madam President, we must devise ways in this country where we have to reduce the time for a trial from 10 years to 3 years, from the time you are charged to the time that you are convicted. There must be science-driven policing. There must be DNA systems involved to solve crime. You must have smaller prisons to keep prisoners away from the hardened criminals. You must have domestic violence shelters to help give care for women and children. You must have programs in primary schools, especially in high-risk communities, to identify children who have reading and learning disabilities who are at risk of an early exit from the education system. You must ensure that those children in school do not fall prey to gang leaders. You must expand your CCTV camera network and introduce the necessary legislation to use the evidence in court. Develop proper mentoring programs in at-risk communities to keep at-risk youth away from gangs. Enhance the use of the military in support initiatives of law enforcement, especially in community and mentoring programs. You must have proper border controls, including international assistance to stem the flow of guns in Trinidad and Tobago. Right now, there are no effective border controls. Our borders are porous, and they will continue to blame OPV, Madam President. We were able to recover $1 billion to the people of Trinidad and Tobago from that OPV arbitration. But they, Madam President, have run down the Coast Guard because they have failed to maintain the existing assets that we are now in this situation. You don't need additional vessels. You need to maintain what you currently have, and it will help address the situation of the porous borders. Madam President, there must be committees involved with ensuring that criminal trials take a much shorter time. You will learn from Northern Europe countries where the time for trial takes place within a year for serious crimes. 1 year for serious crimes. Madam President, when the leader of the opposition spoke in her budget debate, she announced what we know as the Economic Transformation Master Plan 2020, taking us forward into the next government. And in that plan, Madam President,
Senator Hussain, you have 5 more minutes.
I'm grateful, please, Madam President. And in that plan, she offered solutions to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And I would like to outline some of those solutions that we will implement once we are elected into office, because we have a plan. It is unlikely that anyone going into an election announces their plan so early, but we are confident that this will work and this will help the people of Trinidad and Tobago. That is why this plan was announced. We will introduce tablets and dashboard cameras in all police vehicles, not just some, and body cameras on all police officers on duty, fill the vacancies at the office of the DPP, resource the Witness Protection Program, and modernize the Justice Protection Act. Build judicial complexes for court matters to be completed quickly. Implement the electronic monitoring bracelets to help with domestic violence. Look at repealing and replacing the now dated Domestic Violence Act. Establish a National Operations Center as originally designed. Re-establish the Ministry of Justice. Quarterly allocation should be released to the TTPS so that they do not have to go cap in hand every Monday morning begging the Minister of Finance. Rehabilitation, the establishment of a criminal review commission that will be vested with the power to review the record of criminal offenders. Later retirement for members of the Defense Force as they retire at age 45 to 47 after significant training. We will benefit from their training. Utilize part of the UE Debe campus for training our protective services. At this campus, law enforcement officers would be able to pursue diploma, undergraduate, and postgraduate degrees. So in addition, Madam President, to their new dual-purpose training facility for forensic science that will be established, this would be a training and working facility similar to what the teaching hospital in Couva was designed for. These programs will allow our servicemen and women to build sustainable and fulfilling careers while they perform a duty to our nation. And when I sit here, Madam President, I have outlined the plans. I am sure they on that side will not give us any plans or comfort to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And when I sit, they may make spurious allegations, but when they go low, Madam President, we will go high. We are listening to the people. We are doing the work of the people. We are now at a juncture in our nation's history, Madam President, where this government's relevance has expired. They come to the population in their final hours seeking answers and solutions. They have admitted that they are clueless and they do not know what to do. Their incompetence is glaring. They have failed to act as protector of the citizens. It is time for the Prime Minister to do the moral thing and call the elections now. Madam President, I beg to move. Thank you very much.
Someone needs to second the motion.
Madam President, I beg to second the motion and reserve my right to speak at a later stage.
The motion has been seconded by Senator Mark. Honorable Senators, I will now propose the question for debate. The question is, whereas it is the government's responsibility to ensure public safety and security of the citizenry, and whereas thousands of citizens and businesses have been negatively affected by the high levels of crime in Trinidad and Tobago, be it resolved that this Senate condemn the government for its failure to effectively deal with the unacceptable and serious crime situation affecting law-abiding citizens. Minister of National Security.
Madam President. Madam President, the truth is, crime is not a new phenomenon. A lot of the crime and criminality that we are facing and dealing with now in our present day and our present situation is as a result of years of certain actions and inactions which have culminated in the situation that we face today. The one thing that is correct in the motion is that it is a government's responsibility to ensure public safety and security of the citizenry. The government does not stand alone in this effort. And Madam President, at the outset, I say that the right adage to describe it is, what you sow is what you reap. It is not only ironic, Madam President, that the UNC opposition would bring this motion here today. It is downright hypocritical. Because, Madam President, I will spend some time today discussing some of the initiatives taken by this government to tackle the scourge of crime, because it does concern us. It has always concerned us, and we are working towards dealing with it. Madam President, the initiatives that we have put in place are multifaceted, multidimensional, and multi-layered, but the vast majority of them will take some time before we begin to reap the full benefits of them. Madam President, I must, through you, let the population know, however, what are some of the seeds that were sown. Some of the seeds that were sown in that period of 2010 to 2015 that are leading to the difficulties we face as a society today. Because as the speaker before me said, crime is not something new. Crime didn't pop up overnight. In fact, recently I was reading the Scott Drug Report from the mid-80s, and it was astounding to me the observations in that report that were made, the corruption amongst various services, and the names that were called in that Scott Drug Report. The names that were called and listed in that Scott Drug Report. Some of those individuals today who seem to have sanitized themselves and talk from the high tops as pillars of morality in Trinidad and Tobago, including in recent times with respect to crime. Madam President, it is a fact that the difficulties we are dealing with today in the fight against crime and criminality are as a result, as I said, of the actions and inactions of the past. Let's start with illegal firearms, please, Madam President. Trinidad and Tobago does not manufacture firearms and ammunition. How did illegal firearms and illegal ammunition come to be so readily available in our Twin Island state of Trinidad and Tobago? And the first point you start with is border security and how critical it is to secure our borders, not only our seaboard borders, but also our airports and our legal ports of entry. So let me remind the population today, Madam Speaker, of how that was done, UNC style, and why it is we're facing today the difficulties with the number of illegal firearms and ammunition. The first thing that they did in 2010 to 2015 was go up to the Piarco airport and dismantle the facial recognition system at the CCTV cameras. Ask the population, why is it you want to secure your borders at your major international airport? Why did the UNC dismantle the facial recognition? Our borders were compromised. In addition, yes, as the Speaker quite rightly predicted, the cancellation of the OPVs. The OPVs were procured to secure our maritime borders and to allow our Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard the ability to stay out at sea for longer periods and to strategically patrol and position themselves. So the cancellation of the OPVs single-handedly made our borders much more porous than they should have been. But you know what is astounding? With the cancellation of the OPVs, they kept the helicopters that were specifically procured for OPVs that could stay out tens of miles out, patrolling the maritime, and those helicopters were designed for offshore to interdict vessels that would have been picked up. So cancel the vessels, which, by the way, today are being successfully used by the Brazilian Navy, and keep the helicopters. More about helicopters later. Vessels and maintenance. Quite ironic that the previous speaker would talk about maintenance of vessels, because the hostile fast patrol vessels were not properly maintained between 2010 and 2015. In fact, when we came in as an administration and asked for a report on the vessels, those vessels had not been properly maintained. When we asked what had happened, they did not renew the contracts, nor did they spend the money, the time, or the effort to maintain these vessels. So let us now understand that between 2010 and 2015, there was no proper maintenance or proper maritime assets to secure our borders. That is why today we are facing the scourge of illegal firearms. They hustled at the end. They bought a Chinese vessel that arrived in October 2015 after their term, so no working vessels during their term, and they hustled to buy Daman fast patrol vessels. The Daman fast patrol vessels, Madam President, are now the subject, the procurement of those vessels are now the subject of an international criminal investigation. That is how it was done between 2010 and 2015. But let the population know through your Senate, Madam President, that the borders, every time we hear those on the other side stand up and talk about how the borders of Trinidad are too porous, nothing is being done. It is hypocritical, because the most porous period was between 2010 and 2015. No OPV, no maintenance of fast patrol vessels, the interceptors, no new interceptors purchased or built, no interceptors properly maintained. Complete annihilation of the assets of the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard during the period of 2010 to 2015, Madam Speaker. So that is what we face. That is the reason, almost single-handedly, of why we have the number of illegal arms and ammunition. I will get to what we have done about it. But the population must remember, why dismantle facial recognition at your airport? Why not maintain your vessels? Why cancel a contract? The member was boasting about saving $1 billion. Rubbish. What you did is deny our Twin Island state the opportunity and the ability for our Coast Guard to properly patrol our waters. Arms and ammunition. The biggest scourge we face in the fight against criminality and crime today is based on the illegal arms and ammunition. The Americans, our best ally, or one of our best allies in the fight against crime, spent millions of dollars training Trinidad and Tobago police officers to set up a unit called CERU, Special Evidence Recovery Unit, to train police officers in ballistics, forensics, how to analyze illegal arms and ammunition under the UNC government. As soon as we became the government in September 2015, one of the first meetings this administration had with the then US ambassador, he notified the chairman of the National Security Council, the Prime Minister, and myself that the Americans were no longer in a position to provide us with intelligence and no longer in a position to assist us with training. When we asked why, they told us that under the previous administration, they had dismantled CERU. So all of the officers who were specially trained in tracing and tracking illegal firearms had been disbanded and sent all over the police service. Is that an administration that really wants to fight crime? So immediately upon hearing that, the National Security Council under this government insisted that the CERU unit be reconstituted. And I am happy to report that not only have they been reconstituted, but they are working successfully. In fact, 2-3 weeks ago, again in trying to upgrade our forensic ability in ballistics, we had the ballistics expert from the Jamaican police force come down here to start sharing with our CERU unit and our forensic people. So all of these falsities and misinformation with respect to ballistics are completely untrue. We are working hard at it, and it is under us that that unit was once again reconstituted. So again, why cancel OPVs? Why dismantle your facial recognition system? Why get rid of a unit that so many millions of US dollars were spent to put together to tackle illegal firearms? I am reminding the population today, those were the seeds that were sown, and we are now reaping the fruit, the evil, spoiled fruit from that in 2010 to 2015. SAUT, S-A-U-T-T, one of the most successful law enforcement operational arms in the fight against crime. The whole concept of SAUT was a properly vetted unit that had all of the best and the specialists from the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, or Customs and Excise, or Immigration, and our Defense Force, and the importation of expertise from away. When the SAUT unit was set up and the facilities built in Camuto, that is when the real fight against crime was starting to be successful. The assets they had, the technology they had, the blimp. The first thing that the UNC did when they came in was disband SAUT. Again, ask yourself why. Who is it that benefits from dismantling the most successful operation, the most successful unit in the fight against crime? And it cost the taxpayers millions. Because, of course, when they dismantled it, Madam President, the next thing that happened is they fired persons, the then head of SAUT, Brigadier Peter Joseph, and it cost us millions as taxpayers because they had to pay damages. Why dismantle a unit that was successful? Why sell the blimp for a pittance? I have met with so many of the operators from SAUT, so many of the persons who now head our national security apparatus were actually members of SAUT. And they have told me, Minister, with the greatest of respect, that was the best fight law enforcement body in the fight against crime. The first thing that was done by the UNC administration was dismantle it. And you know what was more disturbing? I could say here without fear of contradiction that 3 cabinet members of the UNC went up to Camuto, assembled all of the vehicles being used by SAUT, and handpick which blue light vehicle they would have. They took away the equipment, the bulletproof vest, and all of the other equipment from the operators, put it in a warehouse. And when we came in as an administration, that was the first time the warehouse was reopened, and half of the equipment had rotted and were no longer usable. So when the cry is made that this is how we will do it, and we will do it the same way we did it, let the country remember that is how they dealt with crime. Who stands to benefit from dismantling the operations in the fight against crime? That is the question I ask. Not only did that happen, we talk about technology. You would recall not so long ago a scandal in this country where a former intelligence officer, Denny, appeared on a UNC platform making false allegations against the Prime Minister and the former Minister of National Security, allegations that were found to be completely unfounded and untrue, rebutted very easily. But you know what was the story there? He was one of the UNC officers who, in the intelligence services, dismantled the server system. Because you see, the way the intelligence service technology works, it has fingerprints. You cannot erase who does what. And that is one of the protections of it. But what you can do is you can try and destroy the servers that contain the information. And it is a fact that between 2010 and 2015, that is exactly what happened, Madam Speaker. To successfully, Madam Speaker, fight against crime, you need intelligence and a properly vetted unit dealing with intelligence. That was formerly the SIA, then the SSA. I want to remind the country through you, Madam President. Sorry, I keep saying Madam Speaker. Madam President, I would like to remind the country through you what our intelligence services became during that dark, dark period as we see, right, light. That is what we need, and that is what we got in 2015. But between 2010 and 2015, allow me, through you, Madam President, to remind the country what was the fight against crime. Reshmi Ramnarayan. That was who they put to head the intelligence services. They dismantled the servers. They destroyed equipment. They removed servers. Denny is the product. And whatever else he may have been promised. They fired the officers. They shamed the officers. What you never do with intelligence officers is expose them. And that is exactly what they did. They fired the then head of the unit, called his name every single day. You don't do that to intelligence officers. Madam Speaker, Madam President, to ensure public safety and security of citizens, as this motion talks about, you need a proper Trinidad and Tobago police service. You need to start at the top. You need to have a permanent commissioner of police. Let us recall in the period 2010 to 2015, there was a constitutional majority by the UNC government. They could have changed the constitution. They could have amended the law for the appointment of a commissioner. What did they do? They utilized the then law, appointed a Canadian commissioner and a deputy commissioner, and fired them. In fact, when we get to the discussion on the state of emergency that they called, because of an alleged threat to the Prime Minister, a state of emergency, the Commissioner of Police and his deputy did not even know about it. So where did the information come from? But what that state of emergency was used in their fight against crime, it was used to lock up a whole set of Muslims. They targeted Muslims. And today the state is still paying tens of millions of dollars as a result of a failed state of emergency and damages. Not a single person was convicted. And you had a former Attorney General, who I will come to, because one of the things you do in a fight against crime is you ensure you have people of integrity, people with morality in office, not people being accused of corruption every Monday morning and every Sunday. You have people of morality. You had a former Attorney General, Ram Logan, who was on record as saying, don't appoint a permanent commissioner of police. Let him be on contract and sing for his supper every 6 months. That way he will work. So yes, when they read out, the speaker before me read out the PNM administration's policy, and one of the first things is to appoint a commissioner of police. That is exactly what we did. We became an administration on the 9th of September 2015. By December, we had laid in the parliament a new procedure to simplify the appointment of a commissioner of police. And the hypocrisy is of those saying that we didn't do it until 3 years later. It is because the opposition went to court and challenged it, and it wasn't overturned. All the court said is, don't let the Minister of National Security trigger the process. So eventually what we did is appoint a commissioner of police. And that happened under this administration. And what happened when we took it to Parliament? Not a single iota of support by the opposition for their former National Security Advisor, for their former Minister of National Security. They did not support it. Let the country remember, because they did not want a permanent commissioner of police. And I will say here now, with respect to the appointment of deputy commissioners of police, the legislation has been laid in Parliament, and I'm awaiting the Police Service Commission, not awaiting as a minister, but as a citizen, for them to go ahead and start the process. What we did is we amended it to say you must have a master's, because we believe at the management level of the police service, you have to be of a certain stature, a certain quality. And that is what the public could look forward to. That is what we have changed. Nothing was done. Absolutely nothing was done to improve the police service. But I will come to in a short while what it is we have done. And it's not talk, it is reality, and it has been implemented. For a government, Madam President, to ensure public safety and security of its citizens, you should have all-of-government approach, social and sport programs. You know what was the answer to that in 2014, 2013? Live sport. Live sport was the UNC's answer to that. And rather than use a good principle of sporting facilities and sporting programs throughout our communities and our more challenged communities, it turned out to a mushrooming of criminality. There was murder. Lest this country forgets, murder came out of live sport. Persons were murdered, and it mushroomed criminality in the East-West corridor, a particular area. A person is now incarcerated for murder of a senior counsel. He was the program manager of live sport. He was signing on behalf of the permanent secretary under UNC government. The same person who is now in contact with a deputy political leader of the UNC. They don't want me to say it, but I will say it, because it is true. That is what their answer to crime was, and they have the audacity here today to come and try and mislead the population. Live sport was born and bred by a big-mouth person now on the radio. And the current commissioner of police fell out with Anil Roberts at a cabinet meeting and argued with him over the criminality in live sport. So don't come here today, with the greatest of respect, Madam President, and tell us about gangs being given contracts. They bred a level of criminality that this country is still struggling to deal with today. $400 million in one program. That is what this country is reaping the benefit of today, the live sport seed. Technology, of course you have to have CCTV. Let me tell this country here today about the CCTV program that we met as an administration when we came in. The CCTV, National CCTV program, first came about in 2009 for the Summit of the Americas when President Obama was coming here. The upgrade to it was then made, the first one, in March 2010. Done the proper way. The Ministry of National Security purchased the equipment, gave it to TSTT, said install this and let us upgrade the system from 2009. The administration that loves to give out contracts, and the population knows why. Let me tell this country today what happened. In 2011, the same CCTV, national, They take things that are good and they just spoil it with a poison touch. They added 18 cameras for the surveillance bays along the highway. Great idea and concept. You know how much it cost per month? 18 cameras, $202,500, $11,250 per camera. That wasn't good enough. So they talk about expanding. They expanded in 2013, added 500 cameras. Rather than purchase the cameras directly, told TSTT, run wild. TSTT added 500 cameras at a cost of, again, $11,250 a camera per month. Not satisfied with that, in 2015, just before demitting office, add another 800 cameras, now at a cost of $14,000 a camera per month. So what we end up with is a CCTV system where the equipment gets outdated very quickly, the country and the taxpayers paying hundreds of millions of dollars a month to a state enterprise for this camera system. So the question was asked why it wasn't renewed, because it was corrupt. So what did we do? As the Minister of National Security and as the cabinet, we went out for RFP to upgrade the camera system, a competitive RFP. And Madam Speaker, I say here today that there were at least 3 or 4 attempts to prevent the award of a new contractor, a new provider. Files went missing. I wrote to the Commissioner of Police and I have asked for police investigation into how files could go missing in the Ministry of National Security. And what we ended up with is a saving of $310 million per annum with the new award and the new CCTV system. We have saved $310 million a year for a new upgraded CCTV system that I hope will be implemented in the next couple months. So I always listen to those who are screaming loudest, why you didn't. I would not allow the renewal of such a corrupt contract. I stand proud with cabinet members having saved this country $310 million on a new CCTV camera system for the country. Talked about the NOC, the National Operations Center. It is being utilized, and it will be fully functional and utilized for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But let me remind Trinidad and Tobago what happened. They built an NOC for $500+ million, over $500 million. The procurement, I wouldn't get into that. The equipment, Huawei equipment. But you know what was the most offensive part about it? Not a single cent in financing. So it was always award contracts and no financing in place. So one of the first crises we had to deal with on coming in, amongst many others, was to find money to pay for the NOC. That is how it was done. How we are doing it now is ensuring there are multi-agencies in it, and it is being utilized and has been utilized and is going to be fully utilized. Helicopters, because you need helicopters. Madam Speaker, allow me to remind the country about helicopters. Not only did the AW139s from the OPVs were kept by the former administration, and one of them turned into with a wet bar and a flat screen TV used as a maxi taxi from South to Port of Spain on a daily basis. The cost of maintaining those helicopters, which were more than purpose built for the operations we needed, were hundreds of millions of dollars a year. But that's not where the real offense was, you know. Just before the end of the term in 2014, they went and ordered 3 helicopters. One of them could not even come to Trinidad and Tobago. You know what was done by the then Attorney General? The then Attorney General issued a contract, agreed to a contract with no termination clause. So the people of Trinidad and Tobago were burdened with contracts for helicopters costing millions of US dollars every month, each helicopter, hundreds of thousands. One never made it to Trinidad. The other one, as it arrived, no maintenance contract in place, no termination clause, costing Trinidad and Tobago tens of millions of US dollars. We sought to terminate it, fought it, and are trying to settle the matters. So that is what it was about. And what we're doing now, an air unit, a new air unit that will service the police, the Defense Force, and our intelligence agencies, is being launched this month, saving Trinidad and Tobago hundreds of millions of dollars. That is not talk. That is the reality of the situation. Every single thing was self-serving and not done for the benefit of national security. So that is what we need to remember. No maintenance contract. How could you take a helicopter and it can't even come to Trinidad and then take out the termination clause so the people of Trinidad and Tobago can't even cancel the contract? That is criminal in itself, but that is how they dealt with national security. Office holders. Because you see, Madam President, if you're going to really fight crime, your office holders have to stand above it all. They have to have integrity. They have to have morality. The Attorney General of that administration is now before the courts with 2 sets of criminal charges. The irony of calling for witness tampering legislation is the former Attorney General is charged with witness tampering.
Minister, please, I'm going to ask you to not raise those matters or any matters that are before the court. I'd ask you to not deal with that, please.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, we talked about, I heard it mentioned about the giving of contracts to persons involved in gang activity. I remind this country that the former Minister of Housing and the former Managing Director of the HDC are on record in this country between 2010 and 2015 having given a contract to a person of interest, a person who it is alleged is a gang leader, to build a police station. To build a police station. That is how ridiculous it was, Madam President. Giving a criminal a contract to build a police station, that is doing it the UNC way. Prisons. The audacity to come in here and talk about prisons. Nothing was done to improve the prison service in 2010 to 2015. But let me tell you, 2 projects. An $80 million fence, they awarded and built, that there is nothing in between the fence next to the prison. And we are fixing the remand yard that should have been fixed decades ago for 56 to 70 million. So that fence alone could have fixed the remand yard. In times when we have little, they spent plenty. You know what else they did, Madam President? The UNC administration? They took over $300 million of cash. $300 million of cash and bought a warehouse for the state of emergency. $300 million. That could have built a whole new prison. I wish, as the Minister of National Security now, I had the $380 million the UNC government wasted. No benefit to the prison system whatsoever. But what have we done? I'll come to that in a short while. They want to talk about ministers of national security. I turned to my colleague, Senator Dookie, said, how do they get 5 ministers of national security, or 4 under the PNM administration? What did I miss? There are 2. Major General retired Edmund Dillon and me, Madam President. Let me remind the country. You had Sandy. You had Jack Warner. Jack Warner was a Minister of National Security. I would buy Jack Warner a ticket to go to Miami now. First class, one way. Out of my own pocket. No, I'll send him first class. He cannot go to the United States because he's wanted by the authorities in the United States. That is their Minister of National Security. Emmanuel George, Gary Griffith, and Brigadier General Alfonso. 5. So I asked how you got 4. I was told maybe the parliamentary secretary and the minister in the Ministry of National Security. There was a parliamentary secretary or minister in the office of national security there, they can't even remember his name. But they change every Monday morning, every year, 5 ministers. That is how they deal with crime. The fire truck fiasco. Go and tow a fire truck for $6.7 million. Nice. I wish I had $6.7 million now as the Minister of National Security. The Mayaro fire station. Open the fire station is signed for long. They did not buy a single tender or equipment for the fire station. No improvement to the fire headquarters. One thing I can say for sure that this administration is not doing is courting criminals and walking up and down the east-west corridor with criminals. Now, Madam President, that we've gone through a little bit of contextual background and a little bit of historical background as to what we faced in 2010 to 2015. And that cry that when we come back into office, when, God forbid, and you know why God should forbid that happens? For everything I've listed, because that is a little bit of how they dealt with national security during their tenure. Borders. Yes, you have to secure the borders. 2 Cape-class vessels on the way, Madam President. We're working on the interceptors. If they had properly maintained the interceptors, they would have been in the water, but they did not. The upgrade of the radar system, they never upgraded the coastal radar system, Madam President. We are not only maintaining it, but we are upgrading it. We have secured PRCO. The TSA out of the United States has given us a clean bill of health because of the work we did. Minister Sinanan and I went there and toured it with them to ensure what needed to be done was done. Put in proper cameras, etc. We are also working with the United Nations to have a multi-agency...
Minister, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam President. We are also working with the United Nations to have a multi-agency task force. So the border agency they talk about, that is already in place by having multi-agencies work together to secure our borders. And we're getting help from the United Nations. The CCTV system is being upgraded, and we have facial recognition, license plate recognition, and other features at $310 million less. So every time I hear the scream as to why the contract wasn't renewed, that is why. Because in all good conscience, this cabinet would not allow that corruption to continue. The prison system, CCTVs, alarm system, all being upgraded. Yes, stab vests provided, firearms provided, and more on the way. The remand yard is being upgraded. These are some of the things being done. I wish I had the 300 plus the 80 million, the $400 million they spent on 2 completely useless items. If I had that money, I would transform the prison service overnight. But it is being done. Madam President, legislation, the anti-gang legislation, the bail amendment, those are things being opposed by a UNC opposition. These are just some of the things. Unfortunately, Madam President, I've run out of time as to the long list. We have restructured the police service. The police service now has new departments, new vetted departments, new vetted operational arms that are working. We have programs, MILAT, CCC, Cure Violence, new program along with the Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs, the police youth clubs or prison youth clubs. We're co-sharing facilities to have libraries. The disaster management, the demonetization exercise, complete success. That is now a global case study. Madam President, I'd like to end by just reading, because you see, I don't require any validation. Certainly none by those on the other side. The moment those on the other side tell me to go right, I run in left. But the Prison Officers Association of Trinidad and Tobago, through you, Madam President, I'd like the opportunity to just read this into the Hansard. The same body that they scream about, we've done nothing for the prison officers. On the 21st of January 2020, the president of the Prison Officers Association, Mr. Seron Richards, wrote the following letter addressed to me as the Minister of National Security. Dear Mr. Young, there's a quote which says, just as despair can come to one only from another human being, hope too can be given to one only by other human beings. He goes on, we, the representative body for prison officers, know that you hold one of the nation's most volatile, challenging, and thankless positions in government, one which has devoured the strongest, willed, most optimistic, and well-intentioned persons from successive governments who dared to take up the position of Minister of National Security. In this regard, the executive of the Prison Officers Association of Trinidad and Tobago, 2nd Division, wish to publicly encourage you to keep up the fight and commend you for the excellent work you have done since taking up the responsibility to manage the nation's security. You have always had an open door to the association's request as we represent the interest of prison officers, which is unprecedented from any minister that went before, especially as it relates to the protection of prison officers on and off duty. We know that there is much still to do, but we know you have the will and determination to get it done within the arms of national security. We want to encourage you not to let the voices of the critics muffle the praises of those who support your efforts. Press forward and continue to be motivated to go beyond all expectations. And remember, and he provides a quote, I don't need the validation from politicians. The people that I have worked with as the Minister of National Security, unsolicited, one of the most difficult bodies, the Prison Officer Association, has put that on public record. Madam Speaker, in conclusion, I thank you for the opportunity. I remind the people of Trinidad and Tobago what we faced in national security between 2010 and 2015 with the complete dismantling, and I assure you that this government is committed to the fight against crime, and no one is above the law. Thank you.
Senator Richards.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity to make what I hope will be a short intervention on this motion as filed by Senator Hussain. And I commend him for the motion, not because I agree with it in its entirety, but because I think the issue of crime in Trinidad and Tobago is one that is the most critical issue facing our country at this time. It seems to me to be an existential threat to our survivability in Trinidad and Tobago. So to offer a few words on a small subset of crime, and I'll keep the intervention short because I'll tell you there are 6 members on the independent bench who want to make a contribution to this, and I'm not sure we'll get through 2 today because of the general length of time that private members' motions run. So I'll try not to go past 4 o'clock, although I could go until 6 this evening, quite frankly, talking about crime. And I have to say that while I appreciate and commend Senator Hussain for bringing the motion, I don't agree that it's the government's responsibility. It may be the government's executive responsibility for crime. But if we do not change that mindset about who is responsible for crime and who is responsible for contributing to a reduction in crime, we will continue having these conversations for the next 30 years. And I also don't know through you, Madam President, if it is realized, with the exception, I guess, of the hardcore supporters on either the government side or the opposition side, how frustrating it is for many citizens to sit and listen to crime should not be politicized, but you know what, it's your fault. No, it's your fault. No, I am doing better. No, you're doing better. When really and truly, from 2002, when there were 171 murders, and I'm using murders as the barometer, but I'm not in any way excluding rapes, assaults, which are underreported, robberies, etc., as the whole context of crime in Trinidad and Tobago. Because in 2002, it was the last year that we were under 200 murders. From 2003, we went to 229, and on 4 occasions, maybe 5, we went over 500. spanning both PNM and UNC administration. So you're doing better, I am doing better simply does not apply in this situation. And pointing fingers and blame has not gotten us anywhere and will not get us anywhere in the future. And the disagreement I have with the opening part of the motion, that is the government's responsibility, is that I really think we have to change our mindset to while it is the government's executive responsibility, if government, opposition, independence, judiciary, law enforcement, prisons, law association, NGOs, faith-based organizations, academia, educational institutions, sports organizations, families, and the media are not involved in direct contribution to the fight against crime and the maintenance of law and order in Trinidad and Tobago, we are going to continue to abysmally fail. And that is a fact. And the causes of crime in a general sense are really about social inequity and social injustice. We have to change our mindset and provide and contribute to more sustainable solutions. It has to be all hands on deck. I am going to focus today on a small subset of crime which is really, I would classify as a vulnerable group. The issue of women, children, and the elderly being killed in Trinidad and Tobago, because they are the vulnerable group, and we've seen more and more in the last couple of years, more and more in particular, women being the subject of heinous crimes and brutality in Trinidad and Tobago, and that is in terms of murders. Not to mention rapes, which are unreported, and I'll give some statistics in a short while, assaults, etc. And I say that in the context of the laws that a country prioritizes and enacts really give an indication of the value system of that society. So if we think we need to protect vulnerable groups like women, children, and the elderly, we will enact and apply laws specifically related to dealing with those vulnerable groups and protecting them effectively. And I think that approach is where we have been lacking in Trinidad and Tobago. So going back to 1994 and the claims of victory and success by successive administrations in the fight against crime in Trinidad and Tobago, we will see that really should not be applied, because we cannot ascribe the word success or victory when between 1995 and 1999 there were 520 murders. Between 2000 and 2005, it jumped to 1,197 murders. From 2006 to 2010, there were 1,822 murders in our little Twin Island Republic, a jump of 625. From 2011 to 2015, that jumped to 1,985 murders, an increase of 163. And from 2016 to 2019, there were 2,011 murders, and there are 26, if I think, on my last count in 2020 so far. So if you look at those numbers, no administration can claim victory or success. None. A cursory look at these numbers would indicate that there have been over 77,000 murders in Trinidad and Tobago in that crime period for our population size. And that is unacceptable, and no one can claim victory in that regard. As I said before, the last year of under 200 murders was in 2002, when there were 171 murders, and then in 2003 we jumped to 229, and there has been a steady increase in murders since then, in 4 instances over 500. In 2017, 53 women were killed, 43 of those in domestic violence situations. We have a problem in Trinidad and Tobago. We have predators and murderers targeting women in Trinidad and Tobago. And we have to focus on laws and law enforcement protocols that protect women and children and the elderly, which I'll get to later in short form. In 2019, there were 43 murders of women. In rapes, 2008, 670 rapes, and that's reported rapes, and we know rape is a significantly underreported phenomenon. So we could probably double or triple that. In 2009, 642 rapes. In 2010, 632. 2014, 829 rapes. And that is, again, reported rapes. We are failing abysmally at protecting our women in Trinidad and Tobago. And this is why I'm focused on this subset in my presentation, my short presentation today. I'm also going to focus on my colleagues, because I think in the media who might not be happy with me when I'm finished here. Arts and culture, religious organization, and of course legislation. You know, the media is often described, and I'm focusing on the media because I think the media's responsibility in any jurisdiction, because of its importance and impact, goes past just reporting and investigation, because the media's reporting style and manner has an impact on societal behavior, a significant impact. It either desensitizes the population, and it could actually go as far as encouraging a particular abhorrent behavior. So the media, my colleagues in the media, need to be very careful with how they do their jobs. And I will say plainly, I declare, in my earlier incarnation as a radio person, I have played songs on the radio that I am ashamed of today, because I didn't know better. But when we know better, we must do better. And I'm not demonizing art and culture, but it is one of the dimensions that contribute to crime in Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm not, Dr. Fuad Khan, Member of Parliament for Samo Baratari, in the other place, mentioned, I think it's Soka and Chutney, contributing to the abuse of women. In some form, yes, because it normalizes some sorts of abhorrent behavior. When we have children, and I know the artists are going to say, well, art is a reflection of society. Well, art also impacts society. And we have to recognize that while I'm not in any way saying to sanitize or curtail your artistic expression, you have to understand that there's some responsibility with what you say. Because when I could hear 6- and 7-year-olds singing through you, Madam President, Godman, Inchi, XYZ, I cannot be happy in Trinidad and Tobago. Because that is not a narrative that we want 6- and 7-year-olds repeating. Because it has an impact on how they feel about themselves. We have a crisis of value systems in Trinidad and Tobago. And that is why we are where we are today, a crisis of value systems. And if it means that someone gets popular or someone gets gigs and media houses, get clicks and sell newspapers because of the way they report on crime, we have to ask ourselves if the way it is reported, I'll go into some international best practice approaches that other jurisdictions have faced these similar circumstances. And let me just go to one of the more recent issues that I really had a problem with through you, Madam President. Newsday, Wednesday, 29th January. Ryan Hamilton Davis, headline, relatives, killer was pushed over the edge. Reporting on the murder, the brutal murder of Nai Singh at the hands of her estranged husband. So the newspaper did an interview with the family members who, of the family member of the individual who killed his estranged wife, who I'm sure would have been as traumatized as the family members of the victim, who gave an interview, who somewhere in the interview would have said, he was a nice guy, he was a father, a lecturer at the National Energy Center. Why, and quote, unquote, and I'll show you why this is not exclusive to Trinidad and Tobago. Why would a seemingly well-rounded, well-educated man like Singh resort to shooting his wife dead, then turning the gun on himself? Singh's relative, in speaking to the Newsday at Forensics on Tuesday, said they were trying to find that out. Note that the interview is taking place at the Forensic Sciences Center, so the family is traumatized, even though it's the family of the person who did the killing. So they are not in their right frame of mind. But you pick out killer pushed over the edge, suggesting that she deserved it in some abhorrent manner. That is the implication there. So it almost justifies his motion. And that's the headline. That's irresponsible. I'll say it plainly, it's irresponsible reporting. And who wrecks hurt? Because that has an impact on how other men feel justified in abusing and killing women. The other issue I want to cite, Madam President, Cyber, and I'm not demonizing the Newsday, I'm just saying we need to do better because it, in some instances, fuels an unwanted phenomenon in Trinidad and Tobago. And it's not exclusive to the Newsday in any way because it is a sensational headline geared to sell newspapers and clicks online. But at what cost? At what cost? And I'm focusing on the media because I am a part of the media. And we need to do better also in how we report and investigate. Caribbean Women's Group condemned cyber attack on mayor. We had a great historic phenomenon recently when a young woman, Vandana Mohit, was elected the mayor of Chaguanas, I think the first female mayor, if I'm not mistaken. The youngest mayor, I'm sorry. And of course, like the predators out there, she may have made some choices in her past that we all do nonsense in our young lives, but that doesn't mean she can't aspire and lift herself and do better, which she did. Of course, somebody decided that some pictures that were taken, it was an opportune time to release those pictures, trying to embarrass her. And I'm really happy with most arms of the media's response because it was condemned by government, by opposition, by most arms of the media. But of course, some arms of the media chose to run away with it and decide, oh my God, this is a great story to run because we're going to sell papers, because it's scandalous, it's bacchanalia. That is irresponsible. That is someone's life. And we have to do better than that. Because again, the media has a powerful impact on society. And I speak about this because when we do that, we diminish the general value we place on women in society. And as I said before, we have a crisis of value in Trinidad and Tobago. We have to recognize when anything diminishes the value of women and their stature in society, because it diminishes how some people look at women and how they treat women in the society. We have to do better than that, because these are all contributing factors to crime and violence and abhorrent behavior in society. So it's not only the government and the opposition, the media, the churches, the faith-based organizations, we all have a role to play. And if we don't understand our collective role, we are part of the malaise that puts us in the position we are in today. So there are media guidelines for the responsible reporting of violence as outlined in many various jurisdictions. And the Scottish government, and I found it to be a really interesting definition, and I'm focusing a lot on women because what affects women affects children, affects society on a large scale. Because I believe society is built on the shoulders of women around the world. There's no two ways about that. So if we do not protect and value our women, we understand why it's so easy to gun down everybody else in society. We have to protect our women and children and the elderly, which I'll get to later on. I'm also already running out of time, as I indicated earlier. So the Scottish government defines violence against women as, quote, actions which harm or cause suffering or indignity to women and children, where those carrying out the actions are mainly men, and where women and children are predominantly the victims. The different forms of violence against women, including emotional, psychological, sexual, and physical abuse, coercion, constraints, are interlinked. They have their roots in gender inequality and are therefore understood as gender-based violence. And it goes on to indicate that it's an indication of the values placed on women in any particular society, as I've outlined before. So there's quite a bit of international research focused on another publication titled Handle with Care, a guide to responsible media reporting of violence against women, produced by a group called Zero Tolerance. And the international research cites, and I'll go through these quickly, poor reporting of domestic family violence has been the subject of a number of international studies. Here are some useful points. More in-depth reporting of non-domestic violence murders measured by number of articles, word count, column inches, and front page status, and how they are displayed. Domestic violence murders, which are rarely called domestic murders, they have some softened narratives for them, which diminishes the act from what is a heinous act and an atrocious act to something more palatable in the wider society and publishable in some people's impressions. Violence was blamed on, quote, depression. He was pushed. substance abuse, stress. He had a troubled life. The marriage was in trouble. And those sorts of narratives almost justify the behavior. So we have to be careful how we're reporting with those kinds of statements. Far less coverage of victims' lives than victims of non-domestic murder. Less than 22% of articles studied use the label domestic violence. So that's less than a quarter are actually calling it what it is. It is violence. Journalists should make good use of case study information. Journalists should refer to national and international statistics where possible to place individual incidents in a wider social context and provide the bigger picture so readers, viewers, and the society at large can make more sense of it and make better choices. Journalists should conduct all contact with survivors of abuse or violence with respect to their experience, dignity, and safety. They should highlight the gendered nature and highlighting the fact that it's targeting women is very important because it places it in the right social context. It is predatory behavior and it must be called out and condemned as that. They should be very careful with the use of images in reporting violence against women. This article I cited earlier, they used a picture of the couple when they were married, suggesting that it softens it. When you use a picture from the marriage day in the context of a murder, it is generally construed by the international guidelines as irresponsible because it doesn't put it in the right context. Journalists should respect privacy and dignity of abuse survivors at all times and should treat violence against women as a serious concern and use the appropriate tone in reporting. There are also some misnomers that are sometimes propagated not only by the media, but in several sociocultural groups in society that we don't like to talk about in Trinidad and Tobago because then everybody says, well, you're a racist. The late Satma Raj indicated that his group had a problem. Just as young Afro-Trinidadian families need to realize Afro-Trinidadian males have a problem. It is not race, it is fact and social fact that we have to deal with as society. And if we're afraid to talk about these things, we're not going to get anywhere. Some of the misnomers include, through you, Madam President, a man's honor is linked to a woman's sexual behavior, and any deviation from sexual norms disgraces the entire family, so it justifies abusing or killing the woman. Mental health problems are embarrassing and shameful, deterring individuals from seeking help. We have seen, I think it's 2 years ago, a situation where a police officer or two police officers became entangled in what was described, and the use of a love triangle is a dangerous term because it almost justifies when these things happen in society. So someone was wrong for entering a relationship, etc. You have to be careful with the use of the word love triangle. And in that situation, one of the individuals, from my understanding, who had indicated to his colleagues, I am going through a serious problem at home, was ignored until it escalated into a confrontation which ended, I think, with one of the officers dead, because he was portrayed as boy handling stories now, as we see in Trinidad and Tobago. Deal with she, quote unquote. And he did, unfortunately, because he wasn't encouraged to go to seek psychological counseling or help, because then he would be seen as soft. We had calypsos in Trinidad and Tobago, women do like soft man. For those of us old enough to remember, which has a particular connotation, art again. Sex is a man's right in marriage. Girls are responsible for controlling a man's sexual urges. Miss Noah's, it's your fault. If she wears a miniskirt, she encouraged him. So he's almost justified in the behavior. And I know I'm trying to tie it back to crime, Madam President, so I hope I'm not fraying out, trying to stay within the standing orders. Sexual violence is an acceptable way of putting women in their place and punishing them. Another misnomer. Sexual activity, including rape, is a marker of masculinity. Go out and sow your wild oats. Women are just disposable utility for that. Or girls, I should say. Sexual violence, such as rape, is shameful for the victim, which is encouraged in some societal norms. I want to also quote, Madam President, an article in the Newsday, which is a good article in Newsday, so I'm not bashing Newsday. of Thursday, 16 September, Industrial Court President, domestic violence law must cover the workplace. That is President of the Industrial Court, Deborah Thomas Felix, as she spoke at the special sitting of the Industrial Court to mark the opening of the new law term in Port of Spain. And I quote, President of the Industrial Court, Deborah Thomas Felix, yesterday said, there should be amendments to the Domestic Violence Act to protect people in the world of work from criminal acts detailed in the law. She made the call during an address at the special sitting of the court to mark the opening of the new law term. Thomas Felix said, International Labour Organization, ILO Convention 190, the Violence and Harassment Convention 2019, and Violence and Harassment Recommendation number 206 spoke to the elimination of violence and harassment in the workplace. And I'll get to that in more detail later on. Some people are going to like what I'm going to suggest. Also, Thomas Felix bring laws to deal with sexual harassment because it's also a form of gender-based violence. And we missed a golden opportunity a couple of months ago to assertively deal with that. Newsday, Wednesday, 23rd May 2018, Industrial Court President Deborah Thomas Felix has suggested that legislation may be the best first step to deal with sexual harassment, which seems embedded in the Trinidadian society. Quote, I respectfully suggest that the best place to start may be with legislation that defines sexual harassment, along with the introduction of the initiation of workplace policies. And I congratulate the Honorable Minister of Labour, Small and Micro Enterprises, for the policy she completed last year, and I think laid in Parliament, if I'm not mistaken. That is a commendable move. I go on to quote another part of the piece. Quote, many of our songs are riddled with sexual undertones, such as Woman Do Like Soft Man, I Feel Into Wine and Something, A Deputy is Essential, etc. So there are cultural and institutional undertones to the way we value and treat women in Trinidad and Tobago. And I'm not saying we are not a developing society that is evolving, but we have to recognize that what may have been acceptable 20, 30 years ago is simply not acceptable today. Harvey Weinstein is living proof of that in the US. In Australia, and this is one of my suggestions where we may start looking, the Sex Discrimination Act 1984 defines the nature of and the circumstances in which sexual harassment is unlawful, and it spoke to be unlawful for a person to be victimized for making or proposing to make a complaint of sexual harassment to the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission. We have one of those in Trinidad and Tobago. And examples of sexually harassing behavior includes, and I'm citing this because we have not, as a country, as a nation, dealt with the issue of sexual harassment effectively, though, as I said before, I commend the Minister for her move in the policy document. It includes unwelcome touching, staring or leering, suggestive comments or jokes, sexually explicit pictures or posters, unwanted invitations to go out on dates, requests for sex, intrusive questions about a person's private life or body, unnecessary familiarity, such as deliberately brushing up against a person, insults or taunts based on sex, sexually explicit contact, and sexually explicit email or text messages. And it goes on to suggest that every employment entity or workplace devise and apply a code of practice related to sexual harassment in the workplace. In my final moments, Madam President, I would like to cite in terms of that, because of its potential impact in Trinidad and Tobago, the recent issue, without ascribing any innocent or guilt, the recent Darrell Smith situation in Trinidad and Tobago, because I think it's a position for...
Senator Richards, I remind you that you are treating with a sitting member of Parliament, okay. So I remind you of the standing orders.
Okay, thank you, Madam President, I'm guided. A recent situation where we could have, in Trinidad and Tobago, we could have dealt with a situation related to sexual harassment without ascribing any assignment to a person. I apologize, Madam President. To me, much more effectively. One, because the accused there was no justice in the situation for either the accused or the accuser because the process used, wherever the shortfall may have been, was not one that made the population or did justice for either of the two parties. And there was an opportunity, or there may be still an opportunity, to show the country that either wrongful accusations by persons or allegations of misconduct are treated in a particular manner in Trinidad and Tobago. And I think in many cases, because I'm trying to behave myself here, the country, and in particular women, could not have been happy or are not happy with the outcomes of these cases. And I just cited the president of the Industrial Court, Deborah Thomas Felix, and his suggestions where those situations are concerned. So my suggestion is to reopen any particular case and have a thorough investigation, particularly where those cases occur or are alleged to occur in state entities. I think I'm walking a tightrope here. For the simple reason that if we are dealing with a valuation of women in society, which is where my treatise began today, we cannot ignore that dimension of our existence in Trinidad and Tobago, particularly where it relates to harassment in the workplace. And I think I will call on the authorities that be to reopen any case and carry out thorough investigations into those situations to bring justice or a sense of justice to either the accused or the accuser, to show that we value women in our society, and we will do whatever is necessary to protect them, to provide safe working environments, and also to protect the accused in some cases from wrongful allegations. And I think I've been able to manage that quite well. So, in conclusion, Madam President, the issue of, and I want to focus also in my last 2 minutes on the issue of another type of crime that's occurring, which is elderly abuse in Trinidad and Tobago, that we also have not dealt with, because right now there are elderly people, unfortunately, at the hands of family members and unregulated elderly homes who are not being addressed in Trinidad and Tobago. And it is atrocious that, as a country, we are not moving in the direction of enacting laws to protect the elderly more effectively in Trinidad and Tobago. Because to me, that also is an indication of where we prioritize our value systems, especially where vulnerable groups are concerned, in the overall context of crime in Trinidad and Tobago. So I beseech the government to focus on that, to move Honorable Minister Jennifer Baptiste-Primus's policy document to a law against sexual harassment to protect women. And I read the document, and I think it's an excellent foundation upon which a law can be piloted, and the minister is indicating that it's coming, and I appreciate that. And also focus, because we've done quite well with child marriage, Children's Act, etc. So to me, two of the areas that we need to focus on in terms of vulnerable groups are women, laws that protect women, and laws that protect the elderly in the context of crime in Trinidad and Tobago. Madam President, with those few words, I thank you.
Senator Sobers.
Madam President, thank you very much for recognizing me this afternoon to make a contribution to this very important motion brought to the House by Senator Hussain, this being my first time presenting in the Red House since its reopening. From the onset, Madam President, I would definitely like to indicate that I do in fact agree with Senator Richards in terms of what he led off by saying. And that message was definitely echoed by our leader at a Congress that we had on Sunday gone, where she indicated that poverty knows no color. It doesn't understand or recognize yellow or red. Poverty doesn't understand or recognize race or gender. That crime knows no color either. It doesn't recognize or understand red or yellow. It doesn't understand or recognize race or gender. So I do agree, this is an effort that must be all-encompassing. But equally at the same time, we have to recognize, and I say it time and time again, we have to take stock and cognizance of something called the social contract. And that social contract occurs any and every time an administration offers themselves up to the people of any country and indicate to that people that, you know, we need your vote. We want to get into office. We have these plans to move the country forward. And in return for providing us with this vote, we will provide you with proper security plans. We will provide you with proper plans for economic stability. And when that contract is signed, sealed, and delivered, the group of people that form the government must come correct on that contract. They must do their part. And it is clear, based upon statistical, empirical data, based upon the feeling, the pulse of the people on the ground, that this particular administration has breached that contract outright. And we are responsible opposition, and the next government in waiting will treat with it accordingly. I don't know if this particular administration is aware that most persons in this country recognize and feel that they are clearly out of touch with the people in the country. And the most important issue for every right-thinking citizen of our country is the threat to their safety, the safety of their family, and the protection of their property from the criminal element. Madam President, I sat, just like many other senators, and I listened to the responses given by the Honorable Minister of National Security. And I recognize, Madam President, with the greatest of respect, that the Minister would have spent 35 or 36 minutes out of his 40 minutes in his contribution spewing normal political propaganda about things that would have been allegedly done and committed by the United National Congress during its term in office. And then he spent what should have been the majority of his contribution. He spent 5 or 4 minutes speaking about the initiatives that the current administration would have been engaged in to try to reduce the crime levels within this country. And I think that, if nothing else, is indicative of an administration who has failed in its mandate to reduce crime in this country. In an important debate, in an important motion such as this, the lion's share, the majority of the portion of the minister's contribution should have been spent in not only reiterating to the citizenry the actions and the activities being adopted by this current administration, but most importantly, Madam President, reassuring the citizenry that you are not alone, that we will fight with you. We will hold your hands through these dark times. But that was not done today, Madam President. Finger pointing was the name of the game today in the Honorable Minister's contribution. Blame this one and blame that one, and who do this and who spend this money, and who, if I had and if I did and if I... That is what was going on. And a lot of it, correctly so, was a lot of misinformation put forward by the Honorable Minister. And I will definitely try my best to correct some of it, but also touch, because I think Senator Hussain, in his piloting of this motion, dealt extensively with the work that the People's Partnership Administration did between the years 2010 to 2015, and the very eloquent and comprehensive plans that we have to wrestle this country from the criminal scourge that we are experiencing during this tenure. The Minister of National Security, and I mean, the government in particular, constantly peddles a narrative of a world of government approach to dealing with all issues, crime and the economy. A whole of government approach, to deal with crime and the economy. And all I heard from the Minister of National Security are a couple of initiatives from him with respect to those same issues. And it seemed to me, in his contribution, that entire situation was upon his shoulders. So I don't know if it's a whole of government approach or just a Minister of National Security Stuart Young approach? But the minister indicated that, you know, illegal firearms were coming into this country, and the reason for illegal firearms coming into Trinidad and Tobago would have been because of some dismantling of facial recognition software by the People's Partnership Administration. And I could recall, Madam President, because during that tenure, 2010 to 2015, and I still do from time to time, practice heavily in the immigration department, doing a lot of immigration law and matters related to immigration. And I remember vividly, Madam President, that we had an appeal that was going on with a particular citizen from a foreign country. And, you know, we were asking certain questions during the course of the appeal concerning border patrol, border management systems within the country. And it was during that period, 2010 to 2015, a very senior official at the Immigration Division indicated to me, a lawyer during the appeal, that there are processes that particular administration, the People's Partnership Administration, was putting in place to properly effect border management. Because what transpired then was simply if someone was leaving the jurisdiction, even if the person had overstayed, they would usually just fill out a card at the airport section, and that card was supposed to be transcribed into a computer system in the back. A computer system control room by the immigration officers, but in most instances that was never done. So it was the People's Partnership Administration that was consulting heavily with international agencies to try to implement proper border management systems. And what came out of that would have been diverse talk about this system called PICES, a system that this current administration has spent the better part of 4.5 years constantly telling the public that they would implement PICES. What is PICES? Personal Identification, Secure Comparison and Evaluation System. That was promised on several occasions by this particular administration in each and every single one of their budget presentations. But I am reliably informed, Madam President, that there is no PICES operating at the Immigration Division in Piarco. And it reminds me to when I myself would have asked a question in this House last week, Tuesday, concerning protections meted out to immigration officers and customs officers dealing with this coronavirus scare. And the Minister of Health stood up in this Senate and answered with respect to the question. He dealt only or specifically with healthcare workers and never touched or treated with the issue with respect to immigration officials. Never touched and dealt with the issues related to customs officials who may be dealing with persons who are possibly infected with this virus. And only when Mr. Watson Duke indicates to the public that, listen, these persons are also vulnerable. These persons fall under the ambit of the Ministry of National Security. What are you doing for them? Then you have a flurry of conversation from the government concerning properly providing PPE gear for these individuals. And that is the ethos of this particular administration, dealing with arms of the Ministry of National Security, always being left on the back foot. So it gives me no comfort, and I'm certain it gives no other citizen any comfort within this country, when the Honorable Minister of National Security stands in the Senate and reads what amounts to, in my opinion, my humble opinion, a love letter from the prison service concerning certain works that he may be doing. I also heard the Minister of National Security speak about cancelling the OPVs and, oh, we cancel you. And that is the constant peddle. Every time the Minister of National Security graces us with his presence in this chamber, or any other member of the government, they love to speak about the cancellation of the offshore patrol vessels. And I have rebutted it time and time again. Because of the tributaries where most of these boats come into our waters with drugs, with guns from different islands throughout the Caribbean region, coming in from Venezuela with drugs and guns. What we need are drug interdiction boats, the Go Fast boats, which the People's Partnership Administration purchased. And contrary to the story given by the minister, those boats were well taken care of. The boats fell to rot at what I call Stumbles Bay by this particular administration. those boats were left without gas, without proper maintenance for years. Not even getting a proper wash down with the proper lubricants and whatnot so that the boats could work properly within the waters. And what is indicative of that is because the government constantly comes to the public and tells us about this large influx of firearms and this large influx of automatic weapons, these M16s and these weapons of mass destruction on our streets. And I agree. An M16 is not a joke. An AK-47 is not a joke. But when you check the statistics and the empirical data, those firearms started to come into this country. It started to become a serious problem in this country in 2016, while this administration was in office. If they had taken care of the boats, if they had put in better border patrol and better border management systems, we would not be having this conversation today. Then I heard the Minister of National Security speak about CIRU. And CIRU was disbanded by the People's Partnership Administration. And I could recall when we in this Senate dealt with the DNA regulations, most of us, or those of us who are practicing attorneys within the criminal arena, I am certain some of us would have come across cross-examining officers and dealt with the issue of CIRU, where items such as DNA and items such as firearms would have been stored at the CIRU unit located in Komuto. So I'm not aware where the Minister of National Security would have been seized and possessed of this information to indicate then to this Parliament and to the country at large that CIRU was somehow disbanded by the People's Partnership Administration. The Minister of National Security also spoke about SORT and the blimp. We all know why SORT and the blimp failed. There was a big hurrah in this house concerning the blimp being used to spy on private citizens within this country by the People's National Movement Administration, which I'm certain was contrary to the genesis of that particular organization, to the development of that organization. Spying, a blimp for how much ever millions of dollars, flying all over the country, no crime reduction whatsoever, but we are supposed to adopt that as if it's Bible truth. And then I heard the Minister of National Security, which to me was also extremely shocking, coming from his lips, indicating that this administration would have passed the state of emergency to target Muslims. To target Muslims. I couldn't believe he said something like that. When this particular administration was the same one that organized and had officers going into Mohammedville in Aranguez and arresting a set of Muslims in Aranguez. This is the same administration that took months to come to tell the public why officers from certain police units would have gone down to Gulfview and run amok through persons' homes. Granted, there was an explanation given, but months after the issue occurred. So if anybody is accusing anyone of blatantly terrorizing a particular sector or part of this population, it must land squarely at the feet of the People's National Movement. The minister also spoke about live sport and how much corruption was in live sport and this and that about live sport and whatever. And it is the same narrative peddled anytime the People's National Movement is caught with their pants down. A Guardian report, an independent investigative report, revealed that city corporations, regional corporations, controlled by the People's National Movement, giving out $6 million contract to gangsters. And you want to come and tell us about live sport. $6 million in contracts to gangsters. To do what? It's not to buy milk and Pampers. It's not to clothe children in our schools, to clothe children on our streets. It was to purchase the same weapons of mass destruction that you're complaining about. Because how you feel they're getting the money to do it? Then giving whoever they're purchasing it from KFC and bales of onion, they have to give them currency. The minister spoke about CCTVs and how much money we spent, and if he had that money, what he would do, and all sorts of nonsense. And how much of an excuse it is not to operationalize the CCTV cameras now. Is that a...
Honourable Senators, the suspension will now be taken. The sitting will be suspended until 5 p.m. Senator Sobers, you've utilized 17 minutes of your speaking time.